Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time when winter wasn't something you tackled with a smart jacket and thermal socks, but with raw animal instinct, layered pelts, and the kind of grit that doesn't come pre-installed. You're stepping into the 1820s, right into the heart of the Rocky Mountains. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. But that's okay. You're not here to win. You're here to learn what mountain men understood about the cold that we somehow, in all our technical wizardry and fleece-lined comfort, have completely forgotten. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know, what city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of nothing, just a wide, bone-dry silence, broken only by the gentle creak of snow settling under its own weight. The air doesn't hit your face, it stabs. Your nose hairs freeze instantly. You inhale through your scarf, but it's like breathing through a towel soaked in needles. You're officially not in your climate-controlled bubble anymore. You're in the Rockies in late November, and there's no turning back. Your guide is long gone. He muttered something about checking his traps yesterday, but he never came back. Maybe he's fine. Maybe he's a meat popsicle somewhere under a tree. You have a bedroll, some dried meat, and a vague idea of where the river runs south. Not much else. You stand, and everything creaks. Your joints, your boots, the crusted frost on your blanket. It's not even sunrise, but you know if you wait for comfort, you'll die chasing it. Your clothes are stiff. You'd layered up smartly, you thought, but these modern thermal materials, they're working against you. Your sweat from yesterday's hike froze into the lining, so now it's like wearing a coat made of glass slivers. Mountain men knew this lesson. If you sweat, you suffer. They move deliberately. No jogging, no panic, just rhythm. The body, not the fire, was the furnace. Keep it burning, but never boiling. By now you're wishing you had an old-fashioned fur coat. You remember the museum diorama you laughed at once? The one with the grimy guy wearing a ridiculous patchwork of fur, leather, and whatever else he could stitch together with deer sinew. Guess what? He was onto something. Those guys knew that different furs had different jobs. Beaver for waterproof layers, buffalo for warmth, rabbit for padding. Nothing matched, but everything had a purpose. They didn't layer for fashion. They layered like onions built to survive frostbite. You start walking, because standing still is not an option. Your body demands movement. Each crunch underfoot echoes in the air like a gunshot. There are no birds. Even the trees seem to be holding their breath. You realize just how alone you are, and how exposed. That hill you slept beside, it's not shelter. It's a wind funnel. You shift to the tree line. The mountain men always stuck close to cover, to timber, not just for firewood, but for protection from the sky. And then it hits you. Just how weird your idea of cold used to be. Before this, cold was a thermostat war with your roommate. It was forgetting your gloves on the way to work. Out here, cold is a predator. It doesn't just kill, it waits. It watches you make one bad decision. It nudges your comfort threshold a little. Sit down for just 5 minutes. Take off your boots for a second. Don't worry about that wet sock. And boom, you're halfway to hypothermia without even realizing it. The mountain men understood this dance. They didn't defeat the cold. They respected it. You'd never catch them trying to out-tough the elements. They adapted, made peace with discomfort. And slowly, they built up this sixth sense for their environment. How the wind shifts before a snow squall. How snow sounds different when it's about to melt. How the sky gets weirdly silent right before the temperature drops another 10 degrees. By mid-morning you stumble across a frozen stream, maybe a tributary of the Missouri. There's no movement, just a long ribbon of glassy bluish-white ice winding through the trees. You kneel and press your hand to it. It's solid, too solid. And in that moment, you realize how much time the mountain men spent just waiting. Waiting for the thaw, waiting for prey, waiting for the weather to change. Time moved differently for them. You don't rush the cold, you endure it. Your stomach grumbles, you check your pack, a few strips of dried venison, a hunk of questionable cheese, and a pouch of hard beans you have no way of cooking. You chew the meat like leather. It's enough, for now. But already, you're burning through your reserves. The cold makes your body desperate for fuel. This isn't just survival. It's a slow race against your own metabolism. By afternoon, clouds roll in, thick and low like someone draped wet wool across the sky. Light fades, the wind sharpens. You need shelter, but the modern idea of a tent and sleeping bag won't cut it here. You remember something you'd read: snow is an insulator, not an enemy. Dig in, not out. That's what the old trappers did. They carved out snow trenches, stacked pine branches for cover, and cocooned themselves in layers of fur and hide. It wasn't cosy, but it wasn't death either. You think about the first mountain men, the likes of Hugh Glass, Jedediah Smith, Jim Bridger. These weren't the flannel shirt legends with perfect beards. They were filthy, frostbitten, half-crazy wanderers with eyes that had seen avalanches up close. Men who'd been buried in snow and clawed their way out. They didn't have Gore-Tex. They didn't have ultralight gear. They had animal instinct and borrowed wisdom, mostly from indigenous peoples who'd been mastering cold survival for millennia. And that's maybe the first thing we forgot, that cold isn't conquered by tech. It's survived through respect, through slowness, through knowing your limits and leaning into them, not pushing past them. You feel a little smaller now, a little quieter, and that's probably good, because if you want to make it through tonight, you'll need to start thinking more like a mountain man, and a little less like someone who thinks freezing is optional. The first thing you notice about layering, once you stop thinking like a mall shopper and start thinking like someone who doesn't want to die before breakfast, is that modern logic fails fast. You're wearing all the wrong things. Your outer shell is synthetic, flashy, and built for a ski resort, not for crawling through brush or sleeping in slush. Your base layer, moisture wicking, sure, but also cold hoarding once damp. The mountain men had no such illusions. Their layers weren't about performance branding, they were about function, survival, and a little bit of luck. You start fiddling with your gear, trying to imagine what it'd feel like to be wrapped in deerskin instead of nylon. One of the first things mountain men learned and borrowed from the indigenous tribes was that layers weren't just for warmth, they were for management. A good system didn't trap heat endlessly, it regulated it. They wore light, breathable base layers like linen or soft buckskin close to the skin, which wickeded moisture without soaking it in. Then came the warmth: buffalo robes or heavy wool, often repurposed army blankets stitched crudely into coats. The final touch: windproofing, greased leather, oiled hides, or fur turned inward to trap body heat where it mattered most. You spot a birch tree and instinctively press your back against it. The bark is dry and papery, flaking off like old parchment. This used to be fire starter gold, but right now it's a backrest, and you peel off one glove, tentatively testing the air. It burns, not painfully, but with that numb sting that warns you. 10 more minutes of skin exposure, and you'll regret it. You remember a trapper's journal you once skimmed in a dusty archive, something about adjusting your clothes constantly, like trimming a sail, open up while moving, button down when still. Take off layers before the sweat starts, not after. No one back then said, layer up. They said dress dry. Because in the mountains, wet was worse than cold. You could fight cold. Wet was a death sentence. And then there's the strange detail you never thought about, why they always looked lumpy. Those illustrations in old books where a mountain man looked like he was made of laundry bags. That was strategy. Every wrinkle, every bulge of fur or hide was part of a microclimate. They used wool because it stayed warm even when wet. They layered furs backward, sometimes with the hair in, sometimes out, depending on what the day called for. Beaver fur next to the body, pure insulation. Coyote fur turned outward. Excellent at catching wind and frost, and not in a poetic way. It literally trapped frost before it reached your skin. You start thinking about what you're wearing. Synthetic gloves, waterproof boots with some kind of fancy insulation, a jacket that promises breathability, but you're sweating from the shoulders and freezing in the fingertips. That's when it clicks. Your clothing isn't helping you adapt, it's trying to impose comfort. The mountain men, meanwhile, wore discomfort like a second skin. There's a story passed down among old trapper descendants, maybe half true, maybe just campfire legend, about a man named Joe Meek, who once stitched his sleeves shut with bark cord after they tore during a storm. He didn't have backup clothes, he didn't have time to whimper, he just turned a rabbit hide inside out, slapped it over the tear and kept moving. Was it warm? Probably not. but it kept him dry, and that was the win. Another odd truth from the journals, they didn't always wear heavy coats. You'd think, given the conditions, they'd want something thick and impermeable. But no, coats were for stillness, for camp. On the trail, they often moved in just a shirt and vest, deerskin or wool, open at the collar, with a heavy layer strapped to their packs. They'd sweat otherwise, and sweat was the enemy. So, they didn't avoid the cold. They used it. They'd strip to cool down, then warm up naturally. It wasn't toughness. It was timing. It's almost poetic in a harsh sort of way. You think about how the indigenous peoples, like the Crow, Blackfeet and Shoshone, taught the trappers how to live with the cold rather than against it. Layering, for them, came with ceremony and craft. Sinew-stitched seams, furs chosen based on the terrain, clothing repaired so often it became part of the body. There was no shame in patchwork, no shame in stink, just stories, stitched into every sleeve and strap. And speaking of stink, let's talk about grease. They used it everywhere. Bear grease, elk tallow, even rancid lard if that's what they had. Rubbed into the seams of leggings and sleeves, it worked like modern waterproofing. Smelled like an outhouse in July, but it kept the water out and the warmth in some even smeared it on exposed skin. Better greasy than frostbitten. You try to imagine explaining this to someone today. Oh, sorry, I smell like a sausage exploded in a fur coat. It's for survival. You start walking again. Not fast, just enough to keep the blood moving. The wind picks up, slicing through the pine tops like a serrated knife. You cinch your scarf tighter, double-check your gloves, and this time you tuck your shirt in like your life depends on it, because out here it does. A little exposed skin is a big mistake. That gap between glove and sleeve, instant heat leak. You remember a journal entry that said, always tuck the shirt. Cold rides the seams. Now you know what he meant. The deeper truth of the layers, they weren't just physical, they were psychological. Each time you added or removed one, you were making a decision, a strategy. You weren't dressing to express yourself, you were dressing to live another hour. And weirdly, that clarity brings you peace. There's no clutter here, no trends, just wool, hide, and instinct. In the late afternoon, you find a bit of old campsite, maybe just a depression in the snow, a few charred logs, someone else layered up here before you. You squat in the snow, wrap your coat tight around you, and feel the ghost of that old mountain man, whoever he was, watching you from the timberline. He's not judging you. He's just curious, wondering if you've figured it out yet. That surviving the cold isn't about strength. It's about knowing how to listen to it. You pull your scarf tighter, breathe in shallow through your nose and close your eyes. You're starting to learn the quiet language of the cold. The layers are speaking back. By the next morning, something's changed. It's subtle at first. You notice it in the way your breath sticks to your lips, how your cheeks feel slightly tacky when you move your face, like someone glued wax paper to your skin. Then you catch a whiff of yourself. It's not sweat, not quite rot. It's fatty. You're starting to smell like an unwashed skillet, and it's on purpose. This is your introduction to what might be the most underrated cold survival tool the mountain men had. Grease, not motor oil, not hair pomade. We're talking about fat, raw, rendered, slathered, smoked, and smeared like a second skin. At first it seems repulsive. You're picturing rubbing Crisco all over your socks. But once the wind picks up and slices through your insulated boots like they're made of tissue paper, you start to understand the logic behind it. Mountain men didn't just eat fat, they wore it. On purpose. They would smear bear grease on their skin to insulate against the wind, much like how the Inuit used seal oil. You find a tiny canister of lard in your pack, left over from a hasty grocery run you made before this trip, when you thought you were just going camping, not reliving 1825, and you cautiously rub a dab on the tops of your hands. The change is immediate. The cold is still there, but dulled, like someone turned down the volume on winter. Back in the day, bear fat was the gold standard. Rendered over a low fire, strained through cloth, and stored in whatever vessel they had, gourds, clay pots, leather pouches, it became lotion, lip balm, and waterproofing agent all in one. They smeared it into their moccasins to soften them, rubbed it into leggings to keep out wet snow, and even combed it through beards to keep icicles from forming gross. Maybe. Effective. Absolutely. There's an obscure but charming anecdote about a trapper named Old Gabe, who once bragged that after 40 days in the high passes, He was so slicked with tallow that he slid down a mountain slope like a greased pig. Did it actually happen? Probably not. But the image sticks with you. Grease wasn't just a convenience, it was a tool of the trade. And it wasn't just bear fat. Elk tallow, deer suit, even bacon drippings. If it could be melted and rubbed, it had a use. In an environment where cracking skin could lead to infection, and frostbitten toes meant amputation by campfire blade, a little grease went a long way. You feel a strange sense of connection as you rub another smear across the back of your neck. You're not just insulating, you're tapping into a system that predated thermodynamics primitive. Sure, but not stupid. You walk for hours. The snow crunches underfoot in that telltale way that only happens when the temperature is well below freezing. Dry, squeaky, almost musical. Each step you take feels more deliberate now, like you're becoming part of the landscape instead of fighting it. But there's no denying your hunger is building. And here's where the mountain men had another greasy advantage. They ate fat like it was currency. Because in winter, it was. A typical cold weather diet back then wasn't about carbs. There was no granola, no powdered protein shakes. It was meat, meat, and more meat. Specifically fatty cuts, moose hump, buffalo tongue, marrow from cracked bones. The richer the better, and when meat was scarce, they fell back on pemmican. The original survival bar. It was a gruesome but genius combo of dried meat powder, melted fat, and sometimes berries, all mashed together into fist-sized lumps that could last for months without spoiling. You reach into your pack and pull out a commercial version of it, something a modern outdoors brand repackaged for adventurers. You bite in, it's dense, dry, and vaguely meaty. Not awful, but not good either. The old trappers weren't eating for pleasure. They were feeding the furnace because the body, when cold, burns calories like a wildfire. You feel it now, how just walking burns through your reserves, and the only thing that keeps you from crashing is fat. Here's the kicker. Fat doesn't just fuel your muscles, it helps your brain stay sane in the cold. One fringe theory, never quite proven, but deliciously plausible, suggests that early cold weather dwellers evolved a mild resistance to cold-induced depression thanks to diets rich in omega fats. Basically, animal lard was brain lube. Did mountain men know this? Of course not. But they knew they felt sharper after a slab of bear bacon. Coincidence or evolutionary accident? That debate's still open. By midday, you reach a spot where the snow gives way to a shallow rise of frozen grass and granite. You pause and notice something that shouldn't surprise you anymore. A greasy smear on the bark of a tree. Not fresh, but old. Soot mixed with fat. Maybe where someone once leaned back or rubbed their hands after lunch. You smile. Someone else did this years ago. Maybe 100. Maybe longer. This place holds more than cold. It holds memories, and most of them apparently are sticky. You sit, pulling your coat tighter around you and start rubbing your boots. They're too modern. The sole's too thick, too stiff. But they're all you've got, so you improvise. You unscrew the lard tin and smear a line around the stitching. It won't soak in like real hide, but it might do something. You rub some under your chin, behind your ears, into your gloves. The smell isn't great, but the warmth is real. At some point, as the wind shifts and brings the smell of distant pine and old smoke, you realise just how much we've forgotten. Today we have entire aisles of lotions, balms, thermal liners, Gore-Tex shells and synthetic socks, but we still get cold. Meanwhile, those stinking, grease-slicked mountain men, half wild and half frozen, figured out how to thrive with nothing but fat, fire and grit. And not because they had options, because they didn't. The cold was never tamed. Not then, not now, but it was outwitted, one sloppy, smelly, slicked-up step at a time. The trail disappears under your feet again, just a white, shapeless plain with no landmarks, no sound, and no sense of scale. You could be walking in circles and wouldn't know it. The horizon blends into the sky like a smear of ash on glass, and it's then, in that wide, windless silence, that the most dangerous part of the cold makes itself known. Not the wind chill, not the frostbite, it's sweat. It creeps in slowly. At first you're grateful. You've been walking uphill for half an hour and your legs feel alive again, your chest warm. You unbutton your collar just a bit and loosen your gloves. The heat is welcome, but wrong. Because with every bead of sweat that starts to form on your back, you're sealing your fate. The cold doesn't kill through impact, it kills by ambush, and sweat is the trap. Mountain men understood this intimately. If you sweat, you die wasn't just a saying, it was policy. Every movement was measured, every step calculated to avoid overheating. They would stop frequently to cool down, never pushing too hard. If they had to climb a steep slope or cut a trail through snowdrifts, they'd often strip down first, even in sub-zero temps. Not out of bravado, but because they'd learned the hard way. It's easier to warm back up than to dry off. You start feeling it now, that telltale chill across your lower back. Your shirt is damp, and with every gust of wind it turns to ice against your skin. You grimace and stop walking, peeling off your coat and pulling up your shirt. You can already feel the bite. Too late. You were chasing warmth and got sloppy. Now you're paying for it. The mountain men would have caught it earlier. They developed a kind of internal barometer, this hyper-attuned awareness of their body's temperature and moisture levels. It wasn't mystical, just the byproduct of near-death experiences repeated over and over until vigilance became instinct. They learned to trust the signs: a sudden shiver, time to move, damp armpits, strip a layer, cold fingers despite a warm chest, circulation's off, fix it, or lose a finger. One of the lesser-known techniques they used was ventilation. It sounds modern, but really it was just practical clothing design. Tunics and shirts were rarely buttoned all the way up unless resting. Many had armpit vents, literally slits or loose seams, so body heat could escape. Capes and robes weren't just for flair, they were easy to throw off during exertion and pull back on at rest. The goal was always the same: prevent sweat from building. And here's a fun, weird fact. Some trappers, especially the solo types, carried two shirts, one for movement, one for camp. The movement shirt would be stripped off and dried near a fire, then swapped with the dry one once camp was made. You can imagine how these shirts smelled after a week, but function beat fragrance every time. If you ever wondered why old journals mention boiling shirts, this is why: not for style, just to get the crust off. Another method was less practical, more absurd: the shirt dry. It pops up in a few old fur trade letters and oral accounts. After sweating through a shirt, the trapper would take it off, whip it around like a towel to knock out moisture, then put it back on to let body heat finish the job. It sounds miserable, and it was, but it kept them from freezing. They weren't trying to feel good, they were trying to stay alive. The scholarly world still debates whether this level of temperature control was conscious or intuitive. Some anthropologists argue mountain men learned it from indigenous mentors, particularly northern tribes like the Cree and Ojibwe, who practiced winter travel for generations. Others think it was trial and error. You learn fast when error equals death. Either way, the skill was real. They didn't move like weekend warriors. They moved like animals, aware, deliberate, self-regulating. You try to dry off now. It's clumsy and cold and makes you swear under your breath. You peel back your damp shirt, flap it in the wind, and put it back on before your skin gets too numb. Your coat stays off for another few minutes while your body equalizes. You breathe slow, resisting the urge to rush. It's a strange kind of patience that doesn't come naturally, but you feel it settling into you now, this quiet awareness. You're not just fighting the cold, you're learning its rhythm, and that's the part we've forgotten. We think staying warm means staying bundled, cozy, sealed up in warmth. But the mountain men knew better. Warmth is a cycle. You let it rise and fall. You manage it like a fire, not too much, not too little. If you smother it, it dies. If you feed it wrong, it burns you out. Even their camps were designed with this in mind. Fires were kept small and controlled, just enough to warm the hands and dry the socks. They didn't lounge around roasting like marshmallows. They rotated positions, aired out their backs, and slept in layers they could adjust through the night. If a man woke up sweating, he'd pull off a blanket, wake up shivering, add a layer. Simple, but disciplined. There's one famous story, probably exaggerated but deliciously dramatic, about a trapper named Thomas Fitzpatrick who refused to sleep in a full coat even during blizzards. He said it made him sweat in the belly and freeze at the feet. He preferred to sleep in light layers and build a better bed, not warmer clothing, just smarter use of what he had. And he wasn't wrong. You realise it as you set up for the night. You've picked a spot near a thicket of low spruce trees, using their branches to break the wind. No fire tonight, just pine boughs, your bedroll, and body heat. You keep your coat folded near you, not on you, and lie down in just your base layers, letting your sweat dry while your core adjusts. You're not warm, but you're not wet, And out here, that's more important. You'd think that, in the dead of a winter night surrounded by snow and teeth-chattering wind, a fire would be your number one priority. That's the fantasy, right? A crackling blaze under a pine canopy, sparks drifting into the night sky, your hands stretched toward the warmth as you sit back smugly on a log like some flannel-clad survivalist. But the deeper you go into the world of the mountain men, the more one strange truth keeps coming up. They didn't always build fires. In fact, sometimes they avoided them on purpose. It sounds backward at first. Isn't fire the baseline survival tool? But out here, in the deep wild, it's not just about heat, it's about cost time, exposure, risk. You're learning quickly that everything has a price in the cold, and fire, surprisingly, can come with the highest one. You're curled up beneath a low branch canopy, your bedroll tucked tight around your legs. There's no flame tonight, not because you're lazy, but because it wasn't worth it. Gathering wood would have meant another 2 hours of hiking in knee-deep snow, gloves off, fingers stiff, and breath icing up your scarf. Then you'd have to clear the ground, dig out a spot, and get it lit. And that's assuming you could even find dry tinder. If not, you'd be colder, wetter, and more exposed than if you just buried yourself in pine boughs and breathed slow until morning. And that's exactly what mountain men often did. If the weather was brutal, snow, wind, ice, or a combination of all three, they'd skip the fire. Not always, but often. They'd dig into the snow like foxes, line the space with spruce needles or dry grass, and wrap up in their robes or buffalo hides. In extreme cold, a fire could give away your position, invite predators, or, worst of all, melt the snow beneath you and create a slush trap that meant wet gear, and wet gear meant death. It's hard to accept, especially for someone raised on the idea that warmth equals fire. But mountain men saw fire as a tool, not a constant. Like a knife, you don't swing it around just to feel cool. You use it when needed. Otherwise, it stays sheathed. You remember reading a passage from a fur trapper's diary, probably French-Canadian by the spelling, who described going weeks in winter without lighting a fire. They'd eat cold meat or pemmican, sleep under buffalo robes, and heat their fingers on their own breath. When asked why, he wrote only, "Because we are not fools." It was also about stealth. Fires meant smoke. Smoke meant scent. Scent meant danger. Other trappers, rival tribes, or hungry animals. A flickering flame in a white forest might as well have been a beacon. Out here, staying warm was second to staying hidden. Of course, when they did make fire, it was deliberate, controlled. They'd dig a trench, stack stones around it, sometimes even reflect heat off a curved wall of logs or snow. There's a term in old journals, starfire. It refers to a low-burning fire where the fuel radiates out like spokes from the centre, so you can push it inward through the night without getting up genius, honestly. Minimal light, maximum efficiency. But most nights, they slept like you are now, cocooned in their gear, pressed into the earth, and it wasn't about comfort, it was about adaptation. A man who needs fire every night is a man who doesn't last the winter. Fire was a luxury, body heat was the plan. One quirky trick you remember reading about involved pre-warming your sleeping area, without flame. They'd dig a shallow trench and fill it with heated stones during the rare occasions they did build a fire, but more often they'd rely on the insulation trick. Layer pine boughs thick enough and they trap your heat like a thermos. The snow itself acts like a soundproof, chill-proof wall, cold above, warmth below. As long as you're dry, you're good. Still, the psychological pull of fire is strong. Even now in your pine nest, part of you itches to strike a spark, not because you're freezing, but because you want company light. Assurance. Something to remind you you're still human. And that's what fire gave the mountain men too, when they allowed themselves the comfort. They'd sit around those rare fires and smoke, tell lies, sing low songs in French or English or Lakota, and carve little nothings into the handles of their knives. Fire was story time. It was a break from the brutal clarity of the cold. But it came with its dangers. One debate among scholars is whether fire actually increased exposure to attacks, human or animal. Some argue that fire signalled confidence, scared off wolves and bears. Others point to the many ambush stories where rival trappers or raiding parties tracked smoke plumes in the dusk. Hard to say what's true. Records from that time are scattered, biased, or mythologized. But the pattern remains. Fires were fewer than you'd expect. and always calculated. You lie still, listening to the wind brush across the trees like a broom across a cold floor. There's no glow, no comfort, just you and the dark and the small sounds of your own breath. And in this eerie, vulnerable silence, you feel something the mountain men must have felt too. A weird, almost meditative surrender. You're not fighting the night, you're letting it carry you. You remember a quote scratched into a trapper's journal in the corner of an old museum. "The warmest sleep I ever had was in the coldest snow. At the time, it felt like bravado. Now, wrapped up tight and layered in your own breath, it sounds like truth." The fire wasn't what saved them. It was the choice not to use it when it wasn't needed. The cold isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. And tonight, its lesson is this. Sometimes the best way to stay warm is not to chase warmth at all. You wake up slowly, not because you're rested, but because your eyelids are frozen halfway shut. There's a fine crust of frost on your lashes, and your breath has painted delicate spirals on the inside of your scarf. It's still dark, not pitch black, but that heavy pre-dawn grey that feels like the world is holding its breath. You stretch just enough to make your joints crack, and your blanket of pine needles creaks with you. Surprisingly, you're not shivering. It's not comfortable, not even close, but you're not cold. Not in the panic sense. You made it through the night, which is impressive because you slept in the snow, without a fire, without even a tent. Just you, a blanket of air-trapping pine boughs, your stiff coat folded like a pillow, and your body curled tight like a wintering fox. Mountain men did this all the time. And now you know it wasn't insane. It was calculated. And this morning, you're about to learn how they made their beds in the snow, and how you nearly botched yours. When you first dug in yesterday, it felt ridiculous. Carving out a trench with your hands, scraping away snow until your wrists throbbed and your gloves froze stiff. You didn't go deep. Maybe just a foot or two. But it was enough. The snow acts as insulation. That's the first surprise. In the right structure, snow can be warmer than the air trappers knew this. They dig small, body-length depressions called snow troughs, usually on the lee side of hills or beneath dense tree canopies to block wind. They lined the base with whatever was available: spruce boughs, animal hides, dried grass, anything to lift themselves off the frozen ground. Ground contact was the real killer. It sucked warmth from your body like a leech, slow and invisible. You learned that after 20 minutes of lying on bare snow your first night out, that numb, creeping chill that starts at your spine and spreads, no matter how thick your blanket. Elevation, even an inch, made a world of difference. You look around now, blinking frost from your lashes. There's a light dusting of snow over your bedroll and boots. That's a good sign. Oddly, it means your body stayed warm enough through the night to cause a temperature differential. Warm air escaping, snow falling, freezing on contact. If you'd gotten no frost, you might have stopped producing heat entirely. You don't love that realization, but it sticks with you. Mountain men didn't have sleeping bags. They had what they called robes, heavy buffalo hides, often with the fur still on, and wool blankets scavenged from traders, soldiers, or wherever they could find them. The robe system was genius. One layer fur side down to block ground cold, one layer fur side up to trap rising body heat, and a third, blanket or hide in the middle if they had it. They wrapped themselves like burritos, head to toe, and tightened the bundle with rawhide thongs or twisted cord. Once you were in, you stayed in. Some of the more experienced trappers even carried shelter kits, though not in the modern tent and stake sense. Just a folded oilcloth tarp or a spare piece of waxed canvas. This was laid over the snow trench like a roof, weighed down with rocks or logs. It wasn't glamorous, but it created a microclimate. Less wind, more retained warmth. There are even accounts of trappers sleeping naked in these setups, using only their hides and the insulation of snow. A desperate move, sure, but one that worked when their clothes were soaked from crossing a river or surviving a sleet storm. And the trick wasn't just staying warm, it was staying dry. Moisture is public enemy number one. You roll over now, checking your layers, slightly damp from sweat but not soaked. You got lucky. Some trappers use dried moss or even ash to absorb moisture from their bedding. There's one journal that describes lining your sleeping spot with a thin layer of wood ash. Yes, ash, to wick moisture away. Uncomfortable, gritty, but it worked. When you've slept in the snow for a week straight, you'll try anything. Your stomach growls, loud, demanding, primal. Another brutal truth of winter camping. Calories are as important as insulation. You reach into your pack and chew a bit of frozen meat, trying not to crack a tooth. In the golden age of the fur trade, trappers loaded up on fat-rich food before bed. The idea was to stoke the body's furnace during sleep pemmican, lard-heavy stews, or roasted marrow bones were the nighttime favourites. The cold doesn't sleep, so your metabolism can't either, and when they weren't alone, body heat was fair game. Trappers shared bedrolls without hesitation. There's an awkward hilarity to imagining two grizzled, unwashed men curled up like spooning prairie dogs, but out here, shame dies before frostbite does. Even enemies, if caught in the same storm, might huddle together under a shared buffalo robe survival over pride, always. You take a deep breath. The air still hurts a little, but it's manageable. You sit up slowly, brushing snow off your shoulders, and look around at your makeshift shelter. You'll need to move soon, find better terrain, refill your water. But for now, you're struck by something unexpected. You made it through the night, not by defying the cold, but by joining it, bending with it, learning to think like it, and that's the key lesson here. Mountain men didn't beat the cold, they learned how to disappear into it, sleep in its arms without resistance, become part of the landscape until the cold forgot you were there. It's not about brute force, it's about subtlety, about knowing that sometimes the warmest place in the world is a hole in the snow. Your boots are failing you, not in the dramatic heel-ripping open kind of way. No, this betrayal is slow and sneaky. Your toes have gone quiet, not painful, not even tingly, just silent. And that's the warning bell. Numbness means circulation's retreating. You stamp your feet, wiggle your toes, bend your knees, but it's like trying to start a fire with wet matches. The boots, modern, waterproof, insulated, designed for alpine survival, are cutting off your lifeline. And that's when you remember something odd from an old fur trade manual. Mountain men didn't wear boots at all. They wore moccasins. It sounds backwards, right? Thin leather slippers in the snow? But the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. You sit down on a frozen log, pull off one boot with effort, lace frozen stiff, toe box damp, and immediately feel the cold air hit your sock like a slap. You dig into your pack and pull out the pair you weren't even planning to use on this trip. Soft deerskin moccasins. They're supple, quiet, almost laughably light. But you slide them on anyway, stuff a layer of wool between your foot and the rawhide, and stand. The difference isn't immediate, in fact, at first it's worse. Your foot feels every bump, every jagged clump of snow. But then something interesting happens. As you walk, your feet move. They bend, they flex. You can feel your toes again. The thin soles force you to keep your muscles active. No more passive stumbling, your circulation kicks back in. Blood warms your arches. The moccasins, like all good tools, don't do the job for you. They remind your body how to do it itself. That was the genius of traditional footwear. Trappers didn't want dead weight on their feet. Heavy boots trapped moisture, stiffened in the cold, and cracked when the leather dried too fast. Moccasins, on the other hand, dried quickly by the fire, could be mended with sinew or thread, and let you feel the terrain, vital in icy or unstable conditions. Many even had double soles made from buffalo hide for better durability, especially in rocky or frozen areas. You move through the trees now, lighter and quieter. Your footsteps no longer sound like someone dragging furniture across a frozen floor. Instead, it's the soft crunch of snow, like walking on sugar. And that quiet, that was a survival tool in itself. Mountain men weren't just surviving, they were hunting, trapping, moving through territories that weren't always friendly. Silence kept you fed, silence kept you alive. One fringe account, buried deep in the journals of an old trapper named Hiram Whitlock, described how he'd stuff his moccasins with dried moss, specifically reindeer lichen, to help insulate them on the coldest days. He called it his snow sole. Others used grass, rabbit fur, or even wool scraps. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. You consider doing the same. You pluck a few tufts of dry grass from under a log, stuff them in, and suddenly it's like someone flipped a switch inside your toes. There's an open debate about whether moccasins were adopted by trappers purely for function, or also as a cultural exchange. Most historians agree, indigenous people were the footwear masters of the cold, the Cree, the Blackfeet, the Sioux. They all had variations designed for terrain and temperature, some for snow, others for marshes, still others reinforced with rawhide soles for rocky crossings. The trappers didn't just copy, they learned. Every stitch told a story of adaptation. You pause now by a stream. Well, what was a stream before it became a ribbon of solid ice, and look down at your reflection. Frost sticks to your eyebrows, your cheeks are red and raw, and you look like a cross between a castaway and a museum exhibit. But your feet, they feel fine. Better than fine. They feel awake. The funny part is, moccasins didn't just help in the cold, they helped after. A trapper with frozen feet could stick his soft shoes by the fire, massage his soles, replace the inner lining and get back to walking boots. Once wet and frozen, they were bricks. If you've ever tried to thaw a soaked leather boot at 30 below, you'll know. It's like trying to cook a steak with a flashlight, and mountain men didn't have backups. Maybe a second pair if they were lucky. More often, they carried repair kits, awls, sinew, bone needles, extra hide scraps. A man could sew a new sole onto his moccasins under torchlight with fingers stiff from cold and walk another 100 miles. These weren't disposable shoes. They were part of the body's soft armour. Survival stitched in. You remember another story, this one less well known, maybe even apocryphal. It said that Hugh Glass, yes, that Hugh Glass, the one mauled by a bear and crawling hundreds of miles back to civilization, crafted his own moccasins while injured, using hide stripped from a scavenged animal and thongs made from shredded clothing. He couldn't run, could barely walk. But with moccasins he moved slowly, surely, silently. And it's not just your feet that benefit. The rest of your body adjusts too. With your footing more secure, you waste less energy stumbling. You find yourself stopping less, regaining balance faster, breathing easier. You are, to your surprise, quieter. In the modern world, loud is power. Out here, quiet is control. As the sun rises higher, the trees sparkle like they've been dusted with crushed glass. You crouch to inspect a set of tracks in the snow, rabbit maybe, or fox. You can tell now, because you're not trampling everything in your path. You're walking like a mountain man, not just through the cold, but with it. The modern world gave you boots that promise everything: insulation, waterproofing, traction, style. But out here, those promises are empty. What you need isn't a guarantee. It's feedback. Connection. That's what the mountain men had. That's what moccasins gave them. And now, finally, what they give you. You take another step. Soft. Certain. A little closer to the past and a little warmer in a way you can't measure in degrees. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, and not in the casual, I could eat way. It's the deep, hollow clatter of a furnace running on fumes. You've been burning calories just to exist out here. Every breath a bill, every footstep a withdrawal. And this is where the next lesson from the mountain men hits hard and fast. You don't just eat to stay alive in the cold, you eat to stay warm. The body's a stove, simple as that. You feed it, it burns hotter. You don't, and the fire flickers out. The trapper diet was centered around this brutal math. In the dead of winter, they weren't reaching for comfort foods. They were shoveling in raw fuel, fat, meat, sugar, salt, anything that could keep the furnace blazing through the night. You've got a couple pieces of jerky left, maybe a handful of nuts, but nothing with real kick. And this cold, it demands kick. You hunker down beneath a tree and start rummaging through your pack. That last pouch of trail mix is a sad imitation of the mountain man pantry. They would have scoffed at your organic almonds and freeze-dried cranberries. You pop a few in your mouth anyway, chewing slowly, letting the salt and fat hit your tongue. It's something. But nowhere near what the old trappers lived on. Their holy grail was pemmican. That ugly, unappetizing meat brick you first encountered a few days ago. You dig another piece from your bag hard as rock and suck on the edge of it until it softens. Pemmican wasn't just a survival food. It was the perfect survival food. Dried meat pounded into a powder, mixed with rendered animal fat, and occasionally spiced up with dried berries. Not sweet, not savoury, just dense, greasy, and exactly what the cold demanded. It didn't freeze, it didn't spoil, it didn't take up much room. Trappers carried it in pouches, broke it off in chunks, and ate it cold, hot, or half-thawed. A few ounces could keep you going all day. One journal entry described it as the soul of the buffalo and the heart of the prairie bound with grease. Gross, beautiful, necessary. And then there was molasses. The sticky black syrup might seem out of place in a wilderness toolkit, but it turns up often in trader inventories and camp journals. Why? Sugar. Quick energy. The mountain men would stir it into their coffee, smear it on dried bread, or drink it straight if the day was grim enough. One trapper wrote that a spoonful of molasses could bring back the sun on a dark trail. That's a romantic way of saying it kept him from passing out. Fat was king, sugar was queen, and meat was the whole court. Mountain men weren't counting carbs. They were counting hours until the next kill or trade elk, moose, beaver, raccoon. Whatever could be hunted and rendered became part of the diet. Even porcupine, which was slow and easy to catch, though universally described as greasy, stringy, and sadly cooperative. You wish you had some of that greasy stringiness now. Even a sliver of smoked meat would feel like a banquet. You settle for melting some snow in your mouth. Not the best idea since it lowers your core temp, but you're too thirsty to care. The cold dries you out faster than the heat ever could. Mountain men used to pack snow into leather canteens and carry it close to the body, letting it melt slowly. Others chewed ice or used animal intestines as water bladders. Don't think about that too hard. There's one fringe report, probably half myth, that tells of a lone trapper caught in a blizzard who survived 3 days on nothing but frozen bear grease and melted snow. They say his beard froze solid and had to be cut off with a knife, but he walked out on the 4th day with his pack heavier than when he went in. Apparently, he'd used the downtime to tan a new set of snowshoes from the hide of a wolf he killed with a trap spring. No one knows his name, just the story. Classic mountain man. You can feel your energy sagging now. Even with the jerky and trail mix, it's not enough. You move slowly, conserving motion. That's another tactic the trappers used. Economy of effort. No unnecessary steps. No flailing, no running, just purposeful motion. Because burning energy without fuel, that's suicide in slow motion. You start thinking about how different the modern relationship with food is. We eat for pleasure, routine, boredom. The mountain men ate because not eating was a death sentence, and when they had food, they feasted. Calories were never taken for granted. A fresh kill wasn't just sustenance, it was celebration. Imagine the joy of hot marrow from a buffalo femur roasted over an open flame, crack, scoop, slurp, warmth from the inside out. The diet wasn't just survival, it was strategy. The more fat in your system, the more your body could maintain its internal heat. This wasn't theory. This was tested, day after day, season after season. Some even believed, perhaps not incorrectly, that men who ate fatty meat regularly were harder to freeze. Their bodies had more to burn, more layers of energy between life and death. Some modern cold weather researchers still debate the validity of this. Is it insulation? Metabolism, hormonal adaptation? The science isn't settled. The mountain men didn't care. They just ate more bear. You think back to last night, curled in your pine nest, belly half empty, shivering through the early hours. Imagine if you'd had a handful of pemmican before bed, a shot of molasses, a wedge of greasy venison. You bet you'd have slept better, warmer, deeper. You promise yourself that if you make it out of this with all 10 fingers and toes, you'll never look at food the same way again. No more skipping meals, no more watching your intake. Out here, calories aren't the enemy, they're your only friend. You rise, shoulders aching, and start walking again. Not fast, just steady. You chew as you go, every bite a small act of rebellion against the cold, against starvation, against forgetting. Because that's what this is all about, isn't it? Remembering. Not just what the mountain men knew, but what you've always known. Deep down in the hungry, shivering corners of your being. If you want to survive the cold, you have to feed the fire. By midday, your body's buzzing in that hollow, overworked way, tired but twitchy, like a machine left running on low fuel for too long. The cold hasn't relented, but it hasn't beaten you either. You're trudging, not sprinting, pacing your steps like a man who knows every calorie is an investment. And it's here, in this strange halfway zone between exhaustion and clarity, that you begin to feel something mountain men relied on more than any layer of fur, any moccasin or grease or buffalo robe. Your mind. Not the part of your mind that solves crossword puzzles or remembers to text your sister back. No, the deep mind, the one that watches the horizon with predator eyes, the one that quiets down and listens when everything else is howling. In the cold, that's the mind that keeps you alive, because once the body starts to fade, it's mental endurance that keeps your feet moving. And the mountain men, They had it in spades. They weren't superheroes. They weren't emotionally invincible. But they understood that the cold didn't just test your limbs, it tested your sanity. The silence, the monotony, the white void that stretches on for days. It was easy to go stir-crazy, so they adapted, developed mental routines, inner rituals. Some hummed, some muttered old songs, some carved tiny figures in bits of bone or wood, just to keep their hands busy. The movement was the key, physical or mental. Anything to stop the frost from seeping into the brain. You remember reading about a trapper, name lost to time, who claimed he never travelled without a small stone in his pocket. Just a smooth little thing, probably from a riverbed, with no real value, but he'd rub it between his fingers whenever he started feeling the creeping dread of the wilderness closing in. Said it reminded him of home of warmth, of rivers that weren't frozen solid. Maybe it was superstition, maybe it was genius. Doesn't really matter, it worked. You reach into your own coat pocket now and feel nothing but lint and old crumbs, but you get the point. The mind needs anchors. In the face of cold and solitude, it doesn't take much to start unravelling mountain men often travelled alone for weeks at a time. No music, no podcasts, no voices but their own. And even those got slippery in the long white silence. The journals get weird in those stretches. You'll read pages where the sentences fragment, spelling crumbles, thoughts spiral into loops. Some of them would name the trees argue with the wind, laugh at their own boots. That wasn't weakness, it was survival, finding company in absurdity, leaning into the madness just enough to keep moving. There's a fringe account, probably exaggerated but delightfully eerie, about a French-Canadian trapper who believed the snow had voices. He called them les chuchoteurs blancs. The white whisperers said they spoke only when you were too tired to answer. Some nights he'd talk back, others he'd sing to them, and apparently they sang back. When he was eventually found, after a full winter alone in the mountains, he was completely healthy, if a little strange. They say he still refused to sleep indoors. Too loud, he'd mutter. Can't hear the snow. You can scoff, but after a few days out here you get it. The cold strips everything away. Comfort, distraction, ego. And what's left is raw awareness. Painfully honest. You can't lie to yourself when your fingers hurt. When your breath crystallizes mid-air. When your mind is balancing on a tightrope between focus and fatigue, you either stay sharp or you spiral. And yet paradoxically, the cold brings clarity. It forces your thoughts into alignment. You don't worry about things that don't matter. Bills deadlines, embarrassing things you said in 7th grade, all of that vanishes. The only thoughts that remain are the ones tied to action. Where's shelter? How many hours of daylight are left? Is that snowbank safe to cross? You become entirely present, and that presence, it's addictive. This is the part no one tells you about. The cold doesn't just challenge your body, it rewires your brain. And the mountain men, they weren't just tough. They were aware. They noticed things, minute shifts in the snow's texture, the way a bird call changed before a storm, the scent of dry pine signalling a good fire source nearby. Their minds were like tuned instruments, and cold was the key. You stop walking now, not from fatigue, but to listen. Really listen. The world is still but not silent. You hear the dry rattle of branches, the groan of distant ice shifting under its own weight, even your own heartbeat steady and insistent in your ears. You realise that this is what the mountain men craved. Not just survival, not just solitude, but this stillness. A mind sharpened to a point. There's one quote from Jim Bridger, one of the more famous mountain men that stuck with you. Something like, "A man alone in the cold learns his true company. Scholars argue over what he meant. Maybe it was about God, maybe about madness, maybe both. But you understand it now. Out here, your mind is your company, and you'd better learn to get along with it. You start moving again, slower this time. Not because you're weak, but because you're tuned in. Every step, every shift in wind, every muscle signal from your calves. You're listening, you're present, you're alive. And that's the trick the mountain men knew instinctively. The cold is not an enemy to be conquered. It's a mirror, and if you can stare into it long enough without flinching, you start to see who you really are. You glance at the horizon, snow clouds thickening, light fading just slightly. Another night is coming, and your mind? It's ready. Snow has a sound when it's fresh, still falling. soft, velvety, like someone whispering into a cotton blanket. But the snow you're walking through now is different. It's hard, crusted over with a thin glaze of ice that crackles under your feet. And when your boot, or moccasin in your case, breaks through that upper crust, it makes a sharp crunch that echoes between the trees, which is why you notice, too late, that everything has gone too quiet. The birds are gone, the wind has shifted, even the trees seem to be holding their breath. This is how you learn about snow blindness and frostbite, not from a textbook, but in real time, as your eyes begin to sting and your toes start sending that dull warning hum again. It's not dramatic at first. You just blink more, rub your eyes, see more white than usual. But then the headache starts, blooming behind your temples like slow lightning. It's not a migraine, it's the cold stabbing your corneas through reflected light. Welcome to the mountain men's least glamorous enemy, the invisible sun. It's one of those cruel ironies of the wilderness, how in the dead of winter when warmth is scarce and skies are grey, the sun can still burn you blind not from above, but from below, reflecting off endless snowfields like a million tiny mirrors. You don't see it coming. Neither did they, at least not until they learned the hard way. Mountain men called it snow eyes, or snow fire. The indigenous peoples had stronger words for it, some that translated to sun stabbing the eye, or white blindness. Either way, the outcome was the same: blurry vision, pain, weeping eyes, and in severe cases, temporary blindness. You rub your face now, cursing your own stupidity. Sunglasses were in your bag, probably still are, but they're too little, too late. Back in the day, they didn't have polarized lenses or UV coatings. What they did have were goggles made from bone or bark, carved with narrow slits to reduce light. Inuit peoples used this design for centuries, and some mountain men, smart ones, copied the method. These goggles didn't just look strange, they worked. The slits limited incoming light and increased focus, like squinting on purpose. It looked absurd. It felt absurd, but it kept their eyes intact. There's a surviving sketch of a trapper wearing a pair of bark goggles, with a fur hat pulled down tight and his beard frozen solid. He looks more like a creature than a man, but that's the thing about real survival gear. It isn't about style, it's about function. Everything else is vanity. You squint now, trying to keep your eyes half-lidded as you walk. The snow glare bounces off every surface. A normal human might not notice it for hours, but after days out here, your senses are tuned like violin strings. The headache tells you everything you need to know. Light fatigue is building. Snow blindness isn't just painful, it's dangerous. Lose your sight out here, and you're stumbling meat. So you improvise. You tear a strip from your undershirt, tie it across your eyes like a bandit, and poke 2 tiny slits with your knife. The world becomes a narrow beam of focus, like peeking through a keyhole, but instantly the glare drops, your vision steadies, the headache recedes slightly. It's not perfect, but it'll do. And then there's your toes. You were proud of your moccasins earlier, but now you're learning their downside. Soft soles, no insulation below, and snow that's just damp enough to start creeping in. You wiggle your toes and feel that telltale numbness again. Not the absence of feeling, but a weird tingling fuzz like your body's halfway between existing and not. That's the edge. Push past it, and you lose something. A toe, 2, maybe more. Mountain men faced frostbite constantly, and they didn't always win. Journals mention black toes with casual horror, describing them like you'd describe a stubborn rash. They used fire to thaw limbs, slowly, carefully. Too fast, and the tissue would die faster. If the damage was bad, amputation came next. Knife in the fire, whiskey in the gut, bite down on a stick. It wasn't drama, it was Thursday. One of the most chilling stories, pun entirely intended, is from Osborne Russell's journal. He describes a man who lost most of his toes crossing a frozen creek. He didn't realise how bad it was until he tried to take off his moccasins, and the toes came off with them. No screaming, no ceremony, just quiet, bloody acceptance. They cauterized the wounds with gunpowder and kept moving. You check your own feet now, slipping off your moccasins for a moment. Toes red, some white at the tips, but you can feel them. You massage them hard, wincing, then shove them back inside with fresh, dry grass. You remind yourself, never ignore the numbness. The cold doesn't kill with drama. It kills with indifference. There's a debate among historians, still unresolved, about how often frostbite truly claimed limbs back then. Some argue it was rare, that the mountain men were too experienced. Others say the journals underplayed it, out of pride. That lost fingers and toes were common, just not written about. Shame didn't survive the wilderness, but ego might have. You tighten your scarf, adjust your makeshift snow goggles, and stand. The wind is back lightly, brushing across the trees like fingers testing piano keys. You walk slower now, careful, mindful of every step. You're learning to see with less, learning to listen to your body like the mountain men did, with absolute attention. Snow blindness, frostbite, windburn. These weren't just medical issues, they were stories, warnings. Each scar was a reminder. The cold doesn't hate you. It doesn't love you either. It just is. And if you forget that, even for a minute, it'll take something from you. A finger, a toe, your sight, or maybe your life. You blink through the slits in your bandana and keep walking, and for the first time today you don't feel blind at all. You come upon the remains of an old camp late in the afternoon. A shallow depression in the snow, a blackened circle of fire-scorched earth, and a scattering of bones picked clean by time and scavengers, rabbit maybe, or squirrel. Someone was here not too long ago, a few weeks maybe. Long enough for the tracks to vanish, but not so long that the cold erased everything. There's even a bit of cloth fluttering from a branch nearby, red, faded, stiff with ice. And it hits you, not all at once, but in a slow, stomach-deep way. This guy was probably alone. Which brings you face to face with another truth about the old wilderness life, the myth of the lone trapper. The image we all grew up with, grizzled, silent men moving through the snow, setting traps, staring down wolves with nothing but a knife and an attitude cool. Sure. Real? Not even close. Mountain men didn't do this alone, not if they could help it. The smart ones travelled in pairs or small groups. They watched each other's backs, shared meals, rotated watches during the night, and most importantly, shared warmth. Out here, going solo wasn't rugged individualism. It was Russian roulette with the weather. You squat by the fire pit and run your hand over the ash. Dry, cold, dead. There's a bone not far from your boot cracked open lengthwise. That's the trick. Crack it to suck out the marrow. Fat and protein in one neat little package. Efficient, hungry work. You wonder if the man who cracked it had someone sitting across the fire from him, or if he gnawed it alone, watching the snow fall in silence. Even in the heyday of fur trapping, the early to mid-1800s, most expeditions were run in teams. There were always a few stubborn loners, sure, but the journals tell a different story than the dime novels. They talk about partners with such regularity. It starts to feel like a rule. Partnerships weren't just convenient, they were essential. Imagine this. It's midnight. A snowstorm is howling outside your shelter, and your fire's dying. If you're alone, you have two options. Crawl out into the cold and fix it, or freeze. But if you've got a partner, one person stokes the fire while the other stays wrapped up, preserving core heat. It's a relay race, not a solo sprint. Even the daily routine, checking traps, hauling pelts, cleaning kills, boiling water, building shelters, it all runs smoother with more than one set of hands. Solo trappers moved slower, got injured more often, and ran higher risks of losing everything to one bad fall, one broken snowshoe, one infected cut. Companionship wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And then there's the warmth factor. It's the part people like to ignore or laugh about, but it's real. Body heat saves lives. Trappers bunked together in hides, shared bedrolls, slept back to back under tarps or pine boughs, their breath mingling in the frozen air. Romantic? Not even a little. But when it's 30 below and your firewood's soaked, the choice between awkward cuddling and dying in your sleep gets very, very easy. There's a fringe account of two men caught in a sudden whiteout near the Wind River Range. They couldn't find shelter and had no firewood, so they lay down in the snow, stripped off their coats, and pressed skin to skin inside a shared buffalo robe. That night, one man lost a finger to frostbite. The other lost his pride. Both kept their lives. After that, they were inseparable. Some partnerships were lifelong, others lasted a season. But they were real. And they weren't just practical. They were emotional. Trapping was lonely work. Weeks without speaking, months without seeing a woman, years without the sound of a fiddle or the taste of anything that wasn't salted meat. Companionship kept men sane. You'd learn your partner's rhythms, his silences, his bad habits. You'd fight, joke, sit in silence for hours, and still, you were glad he was there. You remember reading about Jim Beckworth and his road partners. He switched companions often, not because he was fickle, but because the terrain changed different men for different mountains. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about survival. You needed someone who knew the area, who could track elk, who didn't snore, who could splint a broken leg. Relationships forged in the cold were practical first, affectionate second. But still, they mattered. Of course, there were exceptions. The legends, the ghosts. Men like John Coulter, who broke off from the Lewis and Clark expedition and wandered alone through hostile territory, or Liver-Eating Johnson, who allegedly lived as a solo vengeance machine, surviving winters on sheer rage and gristle. But those stories, they're exactly that. Stories inflated, half-true, whispered around campfires. The reality was messier. These men were alone because they'd lost their partners, or been chased from civilization, or were simply too dangerous to live with. Being alone wasn't heroic. It was punishment, or penance. You look again at the remnants of the camp. No extra bedroll, no doubled fire pit, just one set of bones, one pile of ash. Maybe he was stubborn, maybe his partner didn't make it. Either way, this was a man who faced the cold alone, and it didn't end well. You press on, moccasins crunching over the hard-packed snow. The wind picks up again, rifling through the trees like it's checking for loose secrets. You think about the warmth of another person beside you. Not conversation, just presence. Someone to nod to, someone to share silence with. Because the cold doesn't care how tough you are, it doesn't flinch at bravado, but it does respect numbers. And maybe that's what the mountain men understood better than we ever did. Surviving the cold isn't about proving how alone you can be. It's about knowing when not to be. By dusk, the wind's picked up again, not in gusts, but in this slow, curling way that wraps around you like it's looking for cracks. You pull your scarf tighter, but it's not enough. The air is changing, sharp and restless. You've seen this before. The quiet before a snowstorm is never actually quiet. There's a tension to it. Even the trees look nervous, and you realise, if you don't find real shelter soon, you're going to get buried alive in a few inches of poetic misery. Just ahead, past a scraggly bend in the trail, you see what looks like a crude structure. Long poles lean together in a cone, covered with animal hides stretched tight and browned by smoke. Not modern, not temporary, a teepee. You blink, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. But it's real. Smoke curls from the top, slow and lazy. Someone's home. Your first instinct is caution. Out here, any human encounter could be friend or fatal. But as you approach, a figure steps out, tall, wrapped in thick furs, face partially obscured, one hand resting on the edge of the entrance flap. They say nothing. Just nod once and step aside. And just like that, you're inside. Warmth hits you in waves. Not the open, licking flame of a fire pit, but a concentrated, directed heat. The kind that says someone's thought this through. Inside the teepee, it's smoky, yes, but bearable. You can see the central fire burning low and clean, and above it the flaps are pulled just right to vent the smoke. The air is thick with the scent of hide, pine, and a faint touch of something sweet. Maybe dried berries boiling in a pot. You've stumbled into the opposite of everything you've been dealing with. This isn't survival on the edge. This is comfort built from experience. The man, or maybe not quite a man, maybe just a boy hardened by the cold, motions for you to sit. You lower yourself slowly, hands out, closer to the fire. Every part of you aches, and your brain's still trying to catch up. Because this, right here, is something the mountain men learned early and never forgot. Indigenous knowledge of winter shelter was a life-saving revelation. Long before the trappers arrived, before maps, before rifles, native peoples had figured out how to live, not just survive, in the cold. Teepees weren't casual constructions, they were aerodynamic, portable, efficient, designed to withstand wind and snow while staying warm inside. Hides were doubled in winter for insulation. Smoke flaps were adjustable. The floor was lined with grass, furs and mats, layered to trap rising body heat. Every inch of design had a reason. And mountain men, They learned quickly not to reinvent the wheel. They borrowed, they observed, they asked. You see it in their journals, mentions of lodges, shelters, shared meals. Not always peacefully, not always respectfully, but the exchange was there. They were students, and the indigenous peoples of the Rockies, Blackfeet, Shoshone, Crow and more, were the professors. There's a story about a fur trapper named Tom Big Hat Morgan, who got caught in a blizzard so intense he couldn't see his own hands. He stumbled blindly into a Blackfoot camp and was taken in by a family who, legend says, saved him not with medicine, but with warmth. They wrapped him in wet buffalo robes, laid him near the fire, and slowly brought his temperature up. Not too fast, not too direct. He lived, kept all 10 toes, and he never travelled alone again without first asking a tribal elder for weather signs. The tipi you're in now feels ancient but intact. You can see the stitching in the hides, thick sinew, tight seams, no fraying. You spot a few tools hanging near the back, a crooked bone awl, a pair of beaded moccasins drying near the fire, and a bow leaning against a pack. No waste, no clutter, just what's needed. The person who lives here knows what they're doing. You exchange a few words, broken English, fewer gestures. They offer you a drink, something warm, earthy, slightly bitter, possibly pine needle tea, possibly magic. You accept, grateful. It hits your throat like a hug. You're still mostly frozen, but it's like your spirit gets a head start. It's tempting to romanticize this moment, to imagine yourself being adopted into some wise nomadic tribe, learning the secrets of fireless survival and snow tracking by moonlight. But that's not how it worked. Relationships between mountain men and indigenous peoples were complicated, sometimes friendly, often transactional, occasionally deadly. There were treaties and betrayals, partnerships and raids, marriages and massacres. It was never simple, but when it came to winter survival there was respect, because knowledge is hard-earned out here, and the trappers knew if you wanted to make it through a high mountain winter, you had 2 options: learn from those who'd been doing it for centuries, or become a frozen anecdote for someone else's journal. The debate still rages in academic circles. How much of mountain man winter strategy was original, and how much was borrowed? Some scholars argue that nearly all the cold weather skills, shelter, clothing, fire building, food storage, were adapted from indigenous systems. Others say it was a blend, that mountain men refined and hybridized techniques. The truth is probably both, but the outcome is clear. Without native knowledge, the myth of the mountain man would have ended in the first snowstorm. The storm outside starts in earnest now. You hear it in the rising howl of the wind, the sharp thud of snow hitting the outer hides. Inside, the teepee doesn't flinch. It breathes. The flap ripples gently. The fire stays steady. You sit, sip your tea, and feel a warmth you haven't felt in days. Not just from heat, but from being inside, even temporarily, a structure built for this world, built by those who understand it. You think about what you would have done if you hadn't found this place. Probably tried to build a lean-to, maybe huddle under a tree, maybe dig into a drift and pray, and it might have worked. Or it might have killed you. But this is something else. This is knowledge, living and breathing and letting you borrow a bit of it, just for the night. And in the cold, knowledge is as good as fire, maybe better. When you wake up, it's not the cold that greets you, it's heat. Real heat. The kind that settles in your chest and refuses to leave, like someone piled warm stones on your ribs during the night. For the first time in days, your fingers don't feel like ancient driftwood. You wiggle them, and, miracle, they respond. The inside of the teepee is still dim, smoke curling toward the vent above, and the fire's burned down to hot coals. You're wrapped in thick furs, nestled between layers of hide and pine matting, and unless you're hallucinating, you're also pressed against another person. You stiffen for half a second, then relax. Of course, it makes sense. You and your host, who barely spoke more than a dozen words last night, slept practically back to back under the same robe. Not an accident. Not awkward, just necessary. Because this is one of the oldest, most awkward truths of cold survival. Body heat means life, and shame doesn't survive sub-zero nights. Mountain men knew this. They practiced it, relied on it. 2 bodies in a single bedroll meant more than double the warmth. It meant survival insurance. It was simple thermodynamics. When temperatures dipped below what your blankets could handle, and you'd already eaten your last scrap of meat. Another person's warmth could literally be the difference between frostbite and waking up whole. In trappers' journals, this detail pops up more often than people like to admit. Some wrote about sharing robes, or doubling up for warmth, often with a tone that tried to gloss over it. Others were blunt, slept against Clark to keep liver from freezing. You don't argue with that kind of honesty. The modern world has made us squeamish about closeness, about physical proximity without romance. But out here, the cold doesn't care about your personal space. It doesn't care about your awkwardness. It only cares if your body's producing enough heat to keep your organs humming. And sometimes, that means curling up next to someone else like puppies in a den. Some trappers even had regular partners they always slept beside in winter, and not just for warmth. These partnerships created a rhythm, trading shifts at night to tend fires, taking turns boiling snow, even breathing in sync to better share the warmth. There's a kind of intimacy there that's hard to describe. Not sexual, not romantic, just elemental. You sit up slowly, careful not to shake off too much of the shared robe. Your host is still asleep, motionless, breathing slow and deep. Their silhouette is barely visible in the smoke and morning haze. You don't know their story. They don't know yours. But last night, in the quiet trust of that shelter, they gave you something you couldn't have survived without: proximity. And this wasn't just a trapper thing. Indigenous peoples had long understood the power of shared warmth. Families slept together in close quarters, bundled under communal robes or blankets. Even infants were swaddled and tucked between adults. There were no heated bedrooms, no baby monitors, just bodies, fire, and rhythm. Warmth wasn't assigned, it was shared. There's a half-forgotten tale about a winter crossing gone wrong. A group of fur traders caught on a frozen plain with no shelter, no firewood, and temperatures that dropped below anything they'd known before. They wrapped themselves in buffalo hides and lay on the ice, pressed together so tightly they couldn't tell whose limbs were whose. By morning, one man claimed he survived only because the man next to him breathed like a furnace. The man in question didn't make it, but his warmth did. It wasn't just men. In mixed camps or settlements, women, children and elders shared space the same way. Warmth didn't discriminate. Neither did the cold. You remember a fringe account, one of those snippets from an obscure letter tucked in a fur trade archive, where two rival trappers, after a skirmish gone sideways, found themselves stranded together during a blizzard. They had one bedroll between them, both wounded and no fire. By morning they were still alive. The letter simply says, "The cold made us forget why we hated each other." You doubt they became best friends, but they made it through the night. That counts for something. There's ongoing debate in academic circles about how deeply these shared sleeping arrangements affected the psychological resilience of the mountain men. Some argue that physical closeness helped stave off what we'd now call seasonal depression, that it triggered oxytocin responses, lowered stress, and provided emotional ballast against the isolation of winter. Others dismiss it as coincidence. But you've slept alone in the snow, and you've slept beside another human in a warm shelter. You know which one leaves you stronger in the morning. Outside, the wind hums against the teepee walls. You hear the shuffle of snow sliding from the top of the hide. The storm has passed. It's brighter out, but still bone cold. Your body wants to move, but part of you also wants to stay right here, under these robes, breathing in warmth that's not all your own. And it's not just the heat, it's what it represents. Shared warmth is shared responsibility. It's an unspoken agreement. I'll keep you alive if you do the same. It's trust, stripped of all the polite layers we pile onto it in modern life. No handshake, no words, just fire and furs and sleep. You finally shift, stretch out your arms, and gather your things. Your host stirs, nods once, says something you don't catch. You nod back, murmuring thanks in every language you know. Then you step out into the light. The air is sharp, but it doesn't bite. The world has been reset, snow laid fresh and clean across the trees, and you feel, not just rested, not just warm, but reconnected. Because now you carry more than calories, or gear, or layers. You carry proof that even in the coldest places, connection is possible, and sometimes that's the warmest thing of all. By now you've stopped trying to smell decent. You gave up somewhere around day 3, when your wool layers started to develop that swampy musk of dried sweat and wood smoke, with top notes of damp fur and regret. But today, as you hike along the ridge, the wind blowing hard enough to scrape the thoughts out of your head, something new starts to hit your nose. A smell that's not quite human, but also not quite animal. A strange blend of smoke, blood, old grease, and wild musk. It's you. You smell like a furnace, a walking, steaming, half-feral heating unit. And weirdly, that's a good thing. The mountain men didn't wear cologne. They didn't bathe weekly. Most didn't bathe monthly, but they didn't freeze either. And that's because one of the forgotten weapons in their cold weather arsenal was stink, not for intimidation, but for function. You're learning firsthand what they figured out long ago. Heat and hygiene are often at war, and in winter, heat always wins. You're coated in layers of grease, some from your food, some from what you've smeared on your gloves and boots, and a fair amount that's just lingering. You haven't changed your base layer in days. Every inch of you is seasoned like a cast iron skillet. But the payoff? You're warm, you're dry, and somehow your skin isn't cracking apart like old parchment. The filth has become armour. Back then, trappers would go entire seasons without bathing, not because they enjoyed being grimy, but because water, especially cold water, was dangerous. Washing up in a mountain stream meant stripping down, getting wet, and opening yourself to wind, ice, or illness. It was a risk not worth taking, so they didn't. At most, they'd wipe their faces with a snowball, rinse their hands with melted ice, or smoke themselves over the fire to kill the worst of the bugs. But soap, water, baths, forget it. You imagine the stench in a crowded winter camp. Dozens of unwashed men huddled together under a single hide roof, each one cooking meat, chewing tobacco, and sweating into wool and leather. If you had to bottle it, you'd call it Eau de Grizzly. But it served a purpose. It insulated. Not physically, but psychologically. That constant cloud of stink reminded them, this is the wilderness. This is real. And out here, smelling clean doesn't make you strong. It makes you stupid. You pass under a bent pine branch and catch another whiff of yourself. There's something oddly earthy about it now. Less offensive. More animal. It dawns on you that you've joined the food chain, not as a polite observer, but as something that belongs in the landscape. The mountain men didn't aim to rise above nature. They aimed to blend in smell included. And that blending wasn't just philosophical, it had tactical advantages. Ever try to hunt while smelling like a perfumed soap bar? Game animals notice. So do predators, but a man who smells like dead elk, tallow and smoke. He fits in. You've read accounts of trappers using skunk oil to mask their scent on the trail. They didn't fear the stench. They wielded it. One fringe method involved rubbing beaver castoreum onto leggings before a long trek. It smells like vanilla, and hell had a baby, but it helped hide the human scent from wary prey. You wonder if your current funk might serve a similar function. You'd like to believe so. At the very least, it might keep bears at bay, or attract them, depending on their taste that day. There's also something to be said about the mental transformation that happens when you stop smelling like yourself. It strips away identity, makes you feel less human, but also more adapted. The cold doesn't feel like an intruder anymore. It feels like part of the environment you now share a scent with. You've become less a visitor and more a resident. This is the part most modern adventurers skip over. We want the look, the gear, the photos, but not the smell. We treat the outdoors like a gym. Go in, sweat a little, come out and shower. But mountain men didn't visit the wild. They lived in it, and with that came layers of scent, smoke and oil that stayed with them season after season. Jim Bridger, according to one tongue-in-cheek account, smelled so rich with musk and bear fat you'd think he bathed in bacon. People joked that you could track him blindfolded, but no one questioned his ability to survive the worst cold Montana could throw at him. He wore his stink like a badge, like a shield. You glance down at your coat crusted with frost along the collar, stained dark around the cuffs. Your gloves have taken on a shine, stiff and oily from days of grease and exposure. Your hat smells like smoke, sweat, and rabbit fur. None of it feels dirty. It feels earned. You realise now that this stink, this film, this patina, is part of what kept them alive. There's a theory floating around in cold weather survival circles, one of those unproven but kind of makes sense ideas, that the body actually loses less heat when covered in a layer of natural oils and grime. that it helps seal in warmth the way a seal's blubber does. Not scientifically proven, but you're not in a lab. You're in the snow. And right now, you'll take any edge you can get. As the light fades and you make camp beneath a wind-carved rock ledge, you smile at the idea of someone back home wrinkling their nose if they could see, or smell, you now. Because to them, you'd smell like something that needs to be burned, scrubbed, or quarantined. But to a mountain man, you'd smell like experience, like survival. Like someone who's learned that comfort doesn't always mean clean. You curl into your bedroll, still wrapped in your layered funk, and feel the heat trapped around you. Thick, unbothered, familiar. You don't smell good. You smell warm, and that's enough. You wake to a strange rhythm. Whack, whack, whack. At first you think it's something alive, a woodpecker maybe, but then you realise it's you. Your own hands slapping against your thighs to keep the blood moving almost on autopilot. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, brain foggy from half sleep and half warmth. There's a skim of frost on your blanket, a rime of ice in your moustache, and all around you, silence. No birds, no wind, just snow, frozen stiff in the creases of the landscape like old parchment. The fire's long gone out, and with it, your heat. And now it's time to face a hard truth you've been putting off for days. Your rifle won't save you out here, not right now. But your axe might. You dig it out from your pack, short-handled, blunt from use, head stained with pitch and a little rust, and you feel a different kind of reassurance settle into your bones. You've been carrying this tool the way most people carry a phone, out of habit with some vague idea that it might come in handy. But today, you need it. Not for defense, not even for hunting. You need it because nothing stays warm without fuel, and fuel, out here, doesn't come split and stacked in tidy bundles. It's out there, covered in snow, waiting to be chopped. The mountain men carried axes the way modern folks carry multi-tools, close at hand, easy to grab, and not optional. Not some novelty accessory strapped to a leather belt, but a literal lifeline. They knew that in a winter camp an axe was second only to food in importance. Without it, you had no fire, no shelter, no carved pegs or poles or frames. A man with a rifle and no axe could shoot his dinner, sure, but he'd freeze trying to cook it. You crunch through the snow, eyeing the tree line, looking for something dry, something dead but not rotten. That's the trick. Green wood burns badly, wet wood burns not at all, and punky decaying wood will turn to ash before it even catches. You need standing dead wood, ideally a small pine or aspen. Not too thick, not too brittle. And there it is, a lean tree with no needles left, bark peeling like old wallpaper, but solid to the tap perfect. You swing your axe, and the jolt travels through your wrists like electricity. Not pain exactly, just a reminder that this takes work. Mountain men didn't have chainsaws or bow saws or collapsible ultralight forestry kits. They had one axe sharpened against a stone and maybe a backup if they were lucky. That blade had to do everything: split kindling, build shelters, break ice, defend a camp, and occasionally perform surgery no one wanted to talk about. The chopping warms you fast. Within minutes your back is steaming under your layers. You peel off your coat to keep from sweating through your shirt. Lesson learned. Work cold, not hot. That was the mantra. They didn't just swing an axe, they paced it. A rhythm, not a frenzy. Chop, step, rest, chop, breathe, chop. Just enough to get the wood, not enough to burn yourself out. And wood wasn't just for fire, it was the structure of everything. A trapper's bed frame, wood, his lean-to, wood, his snowshoes, his sled, his makeshift ladder to escape a ravine, all wood. In the cold you didn't build from scratch, you shaped what was already there, and the axe made it possible. There's a story, probably more legend than fact, about a man called Lanky Joe who once built an entire cabin with a hatchet and half a saw blade. Took him a month, 2 fingers lost to frostbite, and a broken rib. But when his partners found him, he was sitting by a roaring fire inside 4 solid walls, sipping spruce tea and cursing every log in the place. He lived another 20 years in that cabin. Swore by the axe until his dying day. Modern folks tend to romanticize the rifle. All those tales of long shots, hunting elk and staving off hostile threats with a well-aimed musket ball. But the real workhorse? The axe. Quiet, dependable, brutally effective. You don't need aim, you need stamina and respect. Because the axe didn't just keep you warm, it kept you alive. You chop until your shoulders ache, then gather the pieces and start a small fire. No teepee of logs or perfect pyramid, just shavings, splinters and careful kindling. The flame catches, licks at the bark, then flares up as you add a split log. The sound of fire in the snow is different than anywhere else. It crackles, but with a kind of urgency, like it knows it's borrowed time. You huddle close, feeding it slowly, like an animal you're trying to tame. There's a debate among survival historians, because of course there is, about whether the axe or the knife was the superior winter tool. Some say the knife was more versatile. Others argue that an axe could do everything a knife could do if you were careful. But those who've actually spent time out here, they always side with the axe. You can skin with a blade, sure, but you can't build shelter, firewood or a snow anchor without something that can bite deeper than bark. You glance at the blade now, its edge dulled from the morning's work, and make a note to sharpen it tonight. That's another thing the old-timers never neglected. A dull axe is dead weight. Worse, it's dangerous. It glances, skips, turns one swing into a hospital trip you're not coming back from. Mountain men carried sharpening stones in their kits, and touched up their edges constantly, even in camp, even drunk, even dying. You sit back watching the fire grow stronger and realise how different this feels than using a lighter and a few store-bought logs. This fire is yours. You earned it. Every crackle is a victory over inertia, over cold, over your own temptation to just curl up and let the cold have its way. And that's what the mountain men understood. Guns were flashy. Rifles won glory, but axes built the day, saved the night. And in the unforgiving logic of a frozen wilderness, they didn't worship the bang, they trusted the whack. Mornings in the wild have a strange kind of urgency. The second you open your eyes, even before you remember your name or what century you're in, your body is already calculating. How cold is it? How hungry am I? How far can I go before I have to stop again? And most pressing of all, what's for breakfast? If you're expecting scrambled eggs and a hot mug of coffee, forget it. This isn't brunch. This is bare bones, keep your heart pumping, cold weather fuel consumption, and mountain men. They didn't mess around with dainty portions or balanced meals. They didn't even always cook. Because sometimes out here, cooking is a luxury you can't afford. This morning you stare at your tiny pile of provisions, what's left of a frozen chunk of pemmican, some dried berries hard as rocks, and a block of what was once cheese but now could double as a blunt weapon. There's no fire yet, and honestly, no desire to make one. Your fingers are stiff, and every minute spent gathering wood or blowing on a spark is a minute your body burns through the little warmth it has left. And this is where the mountain men had it figured out. Fireless breakfast. The secret. Prepare the night before. You think of that now, sitting in the cold, chewing on meat like it's jerky-flavoured granite, and wonder how you didn't see it coming. Trappers knew not to start each morning from scratch. They prepped meals the night before, wrapped them in hides or cloth, tucked them near the fire to warm just slightly, or stuffed them into the folds of their sleeping rolls so body heat could keep them soft enough to chew. No cooking, no delay, just bite, chew, move. And no, they didn't have oatmeal with dried cranberries. They had pemmican patties, shaped flat and packed with fat and protein, sometimes rolled in a bit of cornmeal or flour if they were lucky enough to have it. It didn't taste good, but it stuck to your ribs, and that's what mattered. You chew slowly, fighting the cold with every bite, and think about how their mornings would have looked. No fire, no chit-chat, just groggy, frost-covered faces munching on meat bricks, eyes half open, fingers already adjusting snowshoes or checking traps. Some used to melt snow in a tin cup and add just enough crushed bark or tea scrapings to warm their guts, but many skipped even that. They weren't eating for pleasure, they were eating for motion. There's a charming, if slightly gross trick you remember reading. A few mountain men kept a pouch of rendered fat mixed with molasses, which they'd spread on hard bread or dried meat in the morning, like the world's worst energy bar. Sticky, sweet, greasy, and exactly what the cold body craves. You don't have molasses, but you do have a bit of lard, stiff in its tin. You scrape a little out, smear it on the pemmican, and... okay, it's awful. But 10 minutes later your fingers are warmer. Coincidence? Maybe effective? Definitely. The ritual wasn't just about food, it was about momentum. Mornings were cold, bleak, dangerous. Every second wasted was a chance for the cold to get inside you, so they moved. Even if they didn't feel ready. They packed, chewed, walked, all at once. The fire could wait, warmth would come with a movement, some even skipped eating altogether. There are stories of seasoned trappers going until midday before taking their first bite, saving their high-fat rations for moments when they truly needed them. One famous Fur Brigade journal describes men walking 2 hours before breakfast, breaking fast only after the sun cleared the ridge and started warming the trail. They'd eat then, quickly, standing, maybe with a strip of smoked meat between their teeth and one hand already checking their traps. You can understand that now, how eating too early, too slow, too comfortably could hurt you out here. The temptation to linger by a fire, to cook something hot and sit in the glow, that could be fatal because then your body gets lazy, warm, soft, and the minute you step out into 20 below with wet socks and a gut full of stew, the cold hits you like a punch in the lungs. So instead, they adapted. Eat cold, eat fast, eat smart. Some of the more creative mountain men came up with borderline absurd solutions. One journal mentions snow coffee, a blend of crushed stale beans pre-mixed with snow in a tin cup, held in your armpit until it was tolerable to drink. That's not coffee, that's commitment. Another letter describes pre-packing small portions of frozen stew into leather pouches, which they'd gnaw on like a dog with an ice cube until it melted in their mouths. Not elegant, but when the sun doesn't rise for hours and your hands are too stiff to spark a fire, you work with what you've got. There's still a heated debate among wilderness survivalists, modern ones, about whether it's smarter to start the day eating something small or to wait until your body warms through exertion, the consensus. Listen to your own rhythm, and always, keep something edible close to your body overnight. Food frozen solid is food you can't eat, and out here, not eating is a mistake you only make once. You tuck the rest of your food under your shirt close to your stomach and begin packing up. No fire this morning, no comfort, just movement. That's your warmth now, and your breakfast. Still flavourless, still gritty, still saving your life. As you take your first steps across the frozen landscape, wind biting at your neck, you can't help but admire the logic behind it all. These weren't gourmet meals, they weren't even hot. But they were smart, efficient, cold-proof, built for men who didn't need their food to smile back at them, just keep them breathing. Because out here the best breakfast is the one that moves with you. No dishes, no fire, no ceremony, just fuel and forward. The sun never really rises out here, it just starts to exist. It appears as a dull glow behind the ridge, casting light that isn't quite warmth and shadows that aren't quite convincing. You've been walking for hours now, following a half-frozen creek that winds through a steep, narrow canyon. The water beneath the surface groans every so often, like it's trying to remember how to be liquid. You don't trust it, not really, but you're following it anyway because the mountain men knew something we tend to forget. Water shapes everything out here, and in the cold it's both guide and trap. Trappers used waterways like roads, even in winter. Creeks, rivers, and tributaries were natural pathways through otherwise impassable terrain. They connected trap lines, led to beaver lodges, and in the spring they carried rafts loaded with furs back to trading posts hundreds of miles away. But in winter, those same waterways became treacherous, frozen, unreliable, hidden beneath layers of snow and deceptive silence. You step cautiously now, testing each patch of ice with a stick, because one wrong move and you're not just wet, you're dead. There's a long open stretch of ice ahead, smooth and glassy, with snow-blown edges like frosting on a cake. It looks solid. It even feels solid. But you know better. The cold can't always be trusted to do its job. A pocket of warm spring water might be moving under there, or a thin spot formed by wind and sun. And if you go through, you'll be soaked in seconds, weighed down by wet clothes, freezing to the bone before you even crawl out. Mountain men told stories about ice crossings gone wrong like some people tell fishing tales, but theirs usually ended with, "and that's how he lost his boots," or "he didn't come out the other side." They learned to test the ice, read the surface. Bubbles, cracks, even the sound of the creek could tell you whether to proceed or detour. A high-pitched creak meant instability. A low, throaty groan usually meant thicker, safer ice, usually. And even when it was solid, ice had other problems. It was slick, treacherous, and often completely hidden beneath a dusting of snow. More than one trapper broke a bone slipping on good footing. You use a stick now, like a third leg, not because you're old, but because you're wise. It's a trick learned from the journals, an ice-walking pole made from a branch, used to test depth, detect hollows, and if needed, break your fall. You stop for a moment beside a patch of cattails poking through the snow. They're dead now, brown and brittle, but trappers would have recognised them instantly as a sign of shallows, and of food. In late fall they'd dig up cattail roots and roast them like potatoes. Not tasty, not filling, but enough to quiet a rumbling stomach. Even in winter the dried tops could be used as kindling or insulation. Nothing was wasted. That's another cold truth about the relationship between trappers and water. It was always transactional. You had to respect it, never love it, never assume it was on your side. There are accounts of entire trapping expeditions halted because a single crossing froze too early, or didn't freeze at all. Rivers were calendars. They told you what season you were in, how much time you had left, and when it was too late to keep pushing forward. There's a particularly haunting entry from an 1832 Fur Brigade log describing how a thaw came early, melting the river ice mid-journey. The men tried to push across anyway. 2 rafts broke apart. 4 men drowned. 1 froze to death on the opposite shore, unable to start a fire with soaked gear. His pack was found upright beside him, fully intact. He died with everything he needed, just too cold to use any of it. You glance at your own pack now, cinched tight, full of tools you pray you won't need. Rope, flint, a strip of cloth you keep telling yourself is for bandages, not tourniquets. Everything feels heavier near the creek, like the water's pulling at you, even frozen. There's an open debate among survivalists and historians. Did the mountain men really use creeks in winter as often as they claimed? Some say yes, it was the most efficient way to move through rough terrain. Others argue it was suicide, that they only used water routes when snowpack made overland travel impossible. But the truth seems to lie somewhere in between. They used water because they had no choice, because everything else was worse, and because, most importantly, they knew how to read it. And here's the part no one teaches in survival school: how ice sounds different depending on the temperature. Trappers learned that a high-pitched ping meant fresh freezing, safe. Mostly a dull crack meant expansion under stress. Silence, oddly enough, was the worst. Silence meant movement below the surface, pressure building, waiting for something to shift. You pause now, listening. Nothing. Just the soft moan of the canyon. You step carefully, not because you're scared, but because you're paying attention. The farther you go, the more the creek changes. It narrows, climbs, breaks into small frozen falls where the ice gleams like blown glass. You skirt the edge of one, climbing onto dry ground, breathing hard. Movement like this burns calories fast, and you can feel your hunger rising again like a tide. But this stretch of water has value. It's a trapline highway. The old mountain men would have set snares nearby, maybe under that overhanging rock or near the beaver tracks you just noticed. You crouch, examine the trail fresh, maybe from dawn. Small footprints, webbed, muskrat or beaver, still active in this bitter cold. Trappers were masters of patience. They'd build a shelter within sight of their trapline and wait, sometimes days, sometimes weeks. In winter, they checked lines only when necessary, usually in the warmest part of the day, when the cold wasn't as likely to steel fingers. Every trap was a potential meal, every snare a moment of hope. You see now why they followed the creek so religiously. Not just for water, not just for direction, but because life follows water, even in winter tracks. Shelter. Food. You trace the line of paw prints with your finger, brush away the snow, and imagine the man who set this line long before you. Maybe he was watching from the trees. Maybe he died nearby. Or maybe he caught what he needed, packed up, and kept walking, just like you. The creek bends sharply and you follow it. Careful, reverent. Because now you understand. In the cold, time and ice are the same thing. They move slowly, they punish haste, and if you listen close, they tell you everything. The wind has teeth today. Not the kind that bite once and let go. The kind that latch on and gnaw at you slowly, right through your sleeves and collar and into your bones. Every gust sends a shiver from the back of your neck down to your ankles, and you're starting to feel it. That slow, creeping kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, doesn't sting or burn, just quietly settles in like an uninvited guest. You need insulation. Real insulation. Not another layer of synthetic fleece or your backup socks tied around your neck. You need what the mountain men knew better than we do now. Fur isn't for fashion, it's for survival. You stop beneath a stand of snow-draped spruce trees, your breath hanging in front of you like a frozen ghost, and reach into your pack. You pull out the one thing you've been saving for when things got really cold, a ragged beaver pelt, stiff and mottled, but thick and warm as anything you've touched since leaving the lodge. You wrap it around your neck like a scarf and immediately feel the difference. The wind still blows, the cold still claws. But you've just added a shield to your armour. The mountain men didn't carry furs for looks. They carried them because fur is nature's answer to insulation, and nature, for all her cruelty, knows how to dress for her own parties. Beaver, buffalo, fox, coyote, otter. Each one had its purpose. Beaver was king. Dense, oily, nearly waterproof. The underfur was so tightly packed that it trapped heat like a thermos. That's why beaver hats became such a hot commodity in Europe. Stylish, sure, but originally, they were built for weather like this. The trappers knew the value of a good pelt, not just on the market, but on the trail. A beaver pelt made an excellent neck warmer. Otter fur-lined mittens, coyote or wolf fur, when worn with the hide outward, could collect snow and wind on the surface, keeping the warmth trapped underneath. There's even a story about one old trapper who lined his leggings with muskrat skins and claimed his legs stayed warmer than his chest. He might have been half insane by then, but you have to respect the innovation. Fur was multi-purpose too. You could sleep in it, sit on it, wear it, trade it, even use it as emergency gloves if your real ones got wet or lost. One journal recounts a man who froze one of his hands in a river crossing and, with no other option, tied a raccoon pelt around it for 2 days while hiking back to camp. He lost 2 fingers. Not ideal. But he didn't die. That's a win in trapper math. You tug the beaver pelt tighter around your face now, tucking it under your hood, and feel the warmth building slowly. It's a different kind of heat. Not the sharp, artificial warmth of fire, but the gentle, patient heat of your own body being respected and reflected back to you. Fur doesn't generate heat. It conserves it. It works with you. And here's the wild part. The trappers didn't even need full fur garments to stay alive. Most didn't wear luxurious full-length coats. That was for the wealthy. Out here, everything was modular. A fur vest over a wool shirt, a foxtail sewn into a hood, beaver mitts tied with sinew over buckskin gloves. They layered the pelts where it mattered most. Head, hands, feet, and joints. Anywhere heat could escape. Modern winter gear brags about loft and breathability, but fur knows how to breathe. It lets moisture out and holds warmth in. The animal figured it out over generations of natural selection. Humans just had to take notes, and take notes they did. Trappers were excellent at repurposing. If a pelt wasn't fit for trade, it got cut up for gear. Furs with imperfections became collars, patches, padding. Even damaged hides had value. A fox pelt with half the tail missing might not sell at the rendezvous, but it could keep your kidneys from freezing on a long ride through the pass. There's a fringe historical detail that sticks with you. Some mountain men kept a blanket pelt, a single large fur they rolled up tight and tied behind their shoulders. It served as everything. Rain cover, bed padding, windshield, even an impromptu coat for cold nights. They'd unroll it, throw it over their shoulders like a cape, and move through the snow like some greasy silent bear god. Functional, versatile, a little ridiculous. Totally necessary. You take a break now beside a rock outcrop, using the lee side as a windbreak. You dig into your pack, find a scrap of smoked meat, and chew slowly while watching the wind chase snow across the open trail ahead. The beaver fur is already crusted with frost around the edges. That's a good sign. It means the moisture's freezing on the outside, not sucking warmth from your skin. Modern gear promises moisture wicking, but fur, it traps the warmth in before the cold ever gets close. One overlooked fact. Fur doesn't just protect your skin, it protects your rhythm. Trappers weren't sprinting through the woods. They moved slow and steady, and fur allowed for that kind of energy conservation. If they overheated, they'd loosen a wrap. If they stopped, they'd pull the fur back up. It wasn't about staying warm all the time, It was about managing heat loss intelligently. You feel that now, how just the neck wrap keeps your chest and shoulders working better. How the warmth spreads in waves instead of bursts. There's an ongoing academic debate about whether fur was more important as trade currency or survival gear. You could argue both. But one thing's clear. Furs were never just products. They were lifelines. Trappers valued them not only for what they could fetch at a trading post, but for how they kept them alive on the trail back to that trading post. You think back to the man who taught you how to tan hides, an old friend of your grandfather's who smelled like smoke and fox urine, and once told you, if you can't wear what you hunt, you don't deserve to eat it. At the time, it felt like some wild old man poetry. Now, it sounds like truth. As the wind picks up again, howling down from the ridge with renewed spite, you pull the pelt higher over your face. You're not stylish. You're not dry cleaned. You're not even clean, really. But you're warm. And in the world of the mountain men, that's the only metric that mattered. Fur doesn't care how you look, it just wants you to stay. By now you've learned that warmth doesn't come from brute force. It doesn't arrive in a rush of adrenaline or a heroic blaze of firewood. It arrives in whispers, slow, steady choices that add up over the day. And the biggest of those choices? Shelter. Not a tent. Not a sleeping bag that costs as much as a month's rent. But something more basic, more intentional. The mountain men understood that shelter wasn't just about covering your head. It was about knowing how to use every part of the landscape to build something smarter than the cold. You stop on a rise overlooking a narrow valley where the wind cuts like a blade. The sky's turning that milky grey that always means snow is on the way. And you don't need to check your imaginary weather app to know you need to make camp not just anywhere, but well. Sloppy camps kill, smart camps conserve, and the mountain men, they were chess masters of shelter placement. You descend into a thicket of spruce and fir, the air immediately less hostile as the trees wrap around you. This is step one. Find cover, not from animals, from wind. You can build a fire all you want, but if the wind's tearing through your setup, you're just feeding the cold an appetizer before it eats you whole. The old-timers always picked natural windbreaks, boulders, ravines, stands of thick timber, or they built one. A simple log lean-to, stacked tight on one side and open on the other, was often enough to reflect heat back toward the body and give you a fighting chance. You find a downed tree and start working. Your axe isn't sharp, but it's sharp enough. You hack off limbs, pile them up like you're building a beaver dam, and prop them against the trunk at an angle that becomes your back wall. It's messy, uneven. Frankly, it looks like something a drunk raccoon would sleep in. But that's fine. Function over form, always. Next comes insulation. This is where modern campers reach for their foil pads and synthetic mats. You reach for pine boughs. Mountain men lined their shelters with spruce needles and evergreen branches, not because they were cozy, but because they worked. You pile them thick on the ground, layering them like shingles. The goal isn't to make it comfortable, it's to make it separated. Every inch between you and the frozen dirt below is an inch of your body the cold can't touch. There's an overlooked detail in the old journals that comes to mind. Trappers would often line their sleeping spots with bark or even thin slabs of wood if time allowed. Not for luxury, but for moisture control. The snow beneath you melts from body heat, then refreezes, creating this cold, slick trap that pulls the warmth right out of you. So they lifted themselves up. Pine boughs, branches, even their own packs. Anything to float above the deathbed of cold earth. And then, if they had time, they'd build a fire strategically. Not just in front of the lean-to, but angled with the wind, reflected off a stone or log wall, focused back toward their body like a primitive convection oven. Sometimes they'd even dig a shallow trench between the fire and their shelter, letting warm air funnel in beneath their bedding. That kind of detail isn't something you invent when you're desperate. That's the work of men who've spent decades freezing and learning from it. You try a poor man's version of that now. You scrape a shallow pit for the fire, stack stones in a half-moon behind it, and wedge a few thicker logs upright to bounce heat. The fire catches, barely, and starts licking upward, reluctant, but willing. You feed it sparingly. Wood is currency now. You don't want warmth now. You want it in 3 hours, when your body slows down and your breath gets shallow in sleep. You remember reading about men who would stack coals beneath a layer of flat rocks, then lie on top of those rocks with a blanket between them. Not comfortable. Probably smelled like bacon, but effective. Some even dug small snow caves with fur-lined beds and no fire at all, letting the snow act as insulation and their body heat do the rest. A few of them even survived to write it down. The mountain men also learned from indigenous builders who mastered shelter efficiency generations earlier. Teepees, lodges, snow trenches, brush shelters, each built with materials at hand, not shipped in by mule or ordered from a catalogue. They respected shelter as a kind of second skin, not separate from the landscape, but of it. And here's where the debate always sparks. Were these shelters good enough, or just barely not lethal? Some scholars argue that trappers constantly teetered on the edge of hypothermia, that their shelters were survival first, comfort never. Others believe they developed an intimate knowledge of microclimates, choosing not just where to sleep, but where the wind wouldn't turn in the night, where snow wouldn't drift too deep, where trees might drop branches and where the morning sun would hit first. Shelter, in other words, wasn't just built, it was chosen. You sit now, shoulders aching, hands dirty and rough. The shelter is finished, ugly, but functional. The wind's still howling, but not through you. The fire is warm, but not wild. And your bedding? Crunchy, awkward, pine-scented, but lifted off the death trap of snow. You'll sleep tonight. Not well, not long, but better than you would have in the open. You think about how most of us today treat shelter like an entitlement, a right, climate control at the touch of a button, insulation wrapped in drywall, thermostats you can adjust with your phone. But out here, shelter isn't a structure, it's a strategy. Every branch, every log, every decision is either heat or hurt, protection or exposure. The mountain men didn't build homes, they built opportunities not to freeze, night after night, mile after mile. And as you pull your robe tighter and curl into the half-dry warmth of your pine bed, you understand. The real art of winter isn't just surviving the cold, it's thinking ahead of it. The fire's just embers now, small red eyes watching you from the coals, and your breath is coming out in steady clouds. You've made it through another night, and somehow you're still in one piece. Sort of. Your joints ache, your shoulders are stiff, and you've developed a low, constant cough. Not sickness, just lungs adapting to a life lived entirely in freezing air. You roll over in your makeshift pine bed, bones popping like old floorboards, and reach for your canteen, only to find the top frozen shut again. Welcome to morning in the high country. You get the fire going with a few twists of dry grass and some charred leftovers from last night's stack. It takes work, your hands are clumsy from cold, but eventually, flames bloom, small and stubborn. You sit near it, palms out, and your brain does the math. You've got a few bites of pemmican left, a fire barely holding together, and just enough strength to make it to the next ridge. But before you get moving, before you step back out into the wind, there's something you've been thinking about. Something that's come up again and again in the journals, letters, and half-legends of the mountain men. Booze and tobacco. Yeah, that's right. You're going there. You dig into your bag, half out of boredom and half out of ritual, and pull out a small flask. Not a novelty item, just a few ounces of whiskey someone gave you before this trip started. For the cold, they'd said. You've been saving it for some kind of emergency, but now you're curious. You take a small sip. It burns going down, lights a fire in your chest for half a second, and then it's gone. Just a little warmth echoing in your ribs. No miracle, no shield against the cold. Just a temporary burning lie. Mountain men drank. That's no secret. But what's fascinating is why. And when. Whiskey, rum, brandy. These were common trade items, sometimes carried in kegs across the Rockies on mule trains. But in winter, in deep cold, it was less about celebration and more about coping. Long nights, frozen toes, boredom so thick it felt like a second coat. Booze helped, sort of. But not in the way we think. Most trappers knew booze didn't actually warm you up. Not in a real, lasting way. In fact, they'd seen it go sideways too many times to believe the myth alcohol dilates blood vessels, gives you the illusion of warmth while actually increasing heat loss. Trappers would drink to numb the ache, to forget how long it had been since their last real meal, to pretend the wind didn't sound like a dying animal just outside the camp. But if you drank too much, especially alone in a shelter you couldn't escape, you'd fall asleep and never wake up. There's a chilling account, pun unavoidable, of a man who drank himself to sleep in a snow pit, and was found frozen solid 2 days later, flask still clutched in his hand, firewood stacked and untouched beside him. He wasn't stupid, just tired, just trusting the wrong kind of heat. His partner wrote, "He chased warmth in the bottle and lost the race." That line stuck with you. And then there was tobacco, far more widespread, almost universal. Pipes were carved from antler, clay and bone. Chew came in bricks the size of your fist. Mountain men didn't just smoke, they ritualized it, after setting traps, before packing up camp, sometimes mid-march, stopping just long enough to stuff a pipe and light it with the last glowing ember of a dying fire. There's a theory, still floating around in the softer corners of anthropology, that tobacco served as a kind of meditation for the mountain men. Not recreational, but functional. Smoking slowed your breath, gave you a reason to pause, a moment to observe the snowflakes falling, the shape of the wind in the trees, the silence between two heartbeats. One trapper wrote that smoking his pipe helped him see the cold more clearly. Poetic, or just high on nicotine, hard to say. Some even believed it had physiological benefits, stimulating circulation, easing pain, suppressing hunger. There's not a lot of modern science to back that up, but there's also something to be said for the placebo power of ritual smoking didn't change the temperature, but it changed your experience of it. Of course, not everyone agreed. There were purists, men who wouldn't touch liquor or tobacco, who saw it as weakness, distraction, or worse. The journals show signs of quiet judgment. One trapper wrote of his travelling companion, "He drinks too much and talks nonsense in the dark." Another noted, "The pipe soothes, but I find clearer company in silence." There's still debate among historians about whether the fur trade was fueled more by alcohol than ambition. Trading posts often stocked as much booze as bullets, and yes, it was used, sometimes destructively, especially in interactions between traders and indigenous communities, where alcohol was often introduced with devastating effect. That history's not pretty, not comfortable, but it's real. But the mountain men in winter, the ones freezing in their lean-tos, boiling snow for tea, wrapping furs around raw hands, they didn't drink for fun, they drank to dull the cold, to find sleep, to make it just one more night. You take another sip from your flask, just a tiny one. It doesn't help much, doesn't hurt either. You tuck it away again and focus on your fire. It's starting to catch now, fed by a few splinters of dry pine. You pour a little water into your tin cup, rest it near the edge, and watch it begin to steam. No coffee, no molasses, but it's something, a ritual, a reason to sit still for 5 minutes before facing the cold again. And that's the point, isn't it? Booze, tobacco, tea, even just hot water, they weren't escapes. They were anchors, something to do, something to taste, something to feel when your hands were numb and your brain was sliding into silence. The mountain men weren't fools, they weren't reckless hedonists, they just needed something to hold on to. You blow gently on your cup, sip the warm water and stare into the fire. The sun's lifting now, pale and distant, like it's not totally convinced you deserve its attention, but you're still here, still upright, still watching the steam rise, and sometimes that's enough. You feel the storm before you see it. Not in the wind, which has been a constant companion for days now, but in the way the light changes, it turns silvery and flat, like someone laid a thin sheet of metal across the sky. Then the temperature drops. Not a sharp plunge, but a subtle tightening, as if the very air has decided to hold its breath. That's when you know white death is coming. That's what the mountain men called it, white death. Not because it sounded dramatic, but because they'd seen it. Ground blizzards, zero visibility snow so thick it erased everything. The trail, the horizon, the shape of your own body. You're about to walk into one, and if you don't handle it right, the cold won't even need claws or teeth. It'll just swallow you whole. You start prepping fast. Snow's already dancing at your feet, twisting low to the ground like it's searching for a way in. The flakes aren't falling, they're flying, ripped from the surface by the wind, not from the sky. That's the thing with a ground blizzard. It doesn't always need a storm overhead, it just needs loose snow and wind, and together they become a blinding, howling, ice-laced chaos. And in a minute, that chaos will be your world. You've read about this. You thought you understood it. But nothing really prepares you for the first time the world goes white. 1 second, you can see the line of trees ahead. The next, gone. replaced by a shifting, swirling blur of white on white that leaves you questioning whether you're even standing upright. The mountain men had one rule for this kind of storm. Don't trust your eyes, visibility lies, direction vanishes. You think you're walking straight, but your steps are veering in a slow, deadly spiral. There are stories, dozens, of men found dead in a sitting position, just yards from camp, having wandered in a wide loop until their legs gave out. Their eyes open, faces calm. They'd simply gotten turned around and sat down to die. You grab your bedroll, strap it tighter, pull your hood down, tuck every loose piece of fabric into the next, sealing yourself into your clothing like you're putting on armour. Your fire's already smothered by the wind, no time to fight it. This isn't about warmth anymore, it's about orientation. Survival now depends on knowing what direction to move, or whether to move at all. The snow hits like sand in your eyes. Your makeshift goggles help, but not much. The slit is icing over, and each breath fogs up what little you can see. You rely on touch now. Your hands trace the trees to your left. Your feet feel for the harder packed snow beneath your last footprints. You focus not on distance, but on texture. That's how the trappers did it. Feel, not sight. They knew what wind-carved snow felt like under moccasins. They knew the way pine bark ran rough and steady under one hand. They listened to the crunch of snow. Dry snow sounds like sugar. Wet snow is heavier, duller. There's a story, half legend, half likely, about a man named Caleb Roth who made it 10 miles through a blizzard by walking with one hand on a rawhide line he'd strung between his trapline and camp. Earlier that season, blind and freezing, he followed it back like a lifeline, even when it disappeared under a drift. He crawled, felt for the next section, pulled himself forward like a man reeling in hope. When he got to camp, his eyebrows were white, his fingers were black, but he was breathing. You don't have a rawhide line. What you do have is the knowledge that stillness is only your friend after you've found cover, and right now you're still exposed. The trees thin, the wind rises, snow cuts sideways, your scarf stiff with ice, and your outer layer is starting to harden where sweat met cold air. You need to stop, soon, but not yet. A dip in the terrain saves you. A shallow gully, wind-sheltered and half-lined with low pine. You drop to your knees, crawl in, and let the snow collapse in behind you like a curtain. The difference is instant. The noise softens. The wind dulls. It's like ducking beneath the surface of a crashing wave. You sit back against the slope, chest heaving, and let yourself pause. This is what the mountain men called riding the white. Not fighting the storm, not charging through it like some heroic figure, just waiting, letting it pass, letting the world go mad around you while you stay still, alert and wrapped in patience. They were masters at this. Patience was a survival skill, not a virtue. They'd sit for hours in a hollow under hides, blowing on their fingers and counting breaths, because they knew what you're learning now. The cold wins when you move at the wrong time. And there's another reason to wait. Panic is loud, it wastes energy, triggers hyperventilation, dulls your decision-making. That's what the White Death feeds on. Not the cold, but the mistakes one step in the wrong direction. One overconfident sprint towards something familiar. That's all it takes. You remember an entry from a fur trade journal, just a line scribbled in the margin like an afterthought. Did not move, heard nothing, kept fire within lived. The most minimalist survival guide ever written. But here, in this gully, snow blowing above you like war in the sky, you understand it perfectly. The scholarly debate rages about how many mountain men actually died in whiteouts. The records are fuzzy, anecdotal, mostly oral. Whispers passed down from campfire to campfire, journals with half-frozen ink stains, or second-hand retellings from the few who made it out. Some historians argue it wasn't the snow that killed most mountain men, but exhaustion, starvation, and hypothermia combined. Others say whiteouts were the final straw, not the cause of death, but the moment men gave up, sat down, slept, didn't wake. What no one argues is how easy it was to get lost in them, how quickly everything, landmarks, direction, even time, evaporated in that endless swirl of colourless sky. You sit tight in your snow pit, watching as drifts pour over the rim like dry waves. It's hard to believe anything exists beyond it now. The noise is muffled, like the whole world's been tucked under a blanket. Time is weird in here, elastic. You don't know how long you've been curled up like this. An hour? 3. You check your hands, fingers flexing stiffly, grateful they still respond. No white spots, no waxy stiffness yet. You've still got circulation. That's the only clock that matters now. The mountain men didn't have watches, and even if they had, what good would they have done out here? They measured time by light, breath, the number of times they had to blow on their fingers before they could feel them again. One trapper wrote that in a whiteout, time becomes the wind. It just keeps going whether you're moving or not. You press back against the snow and let your mind wander, not because you want to, but because the cold wants you to. That's the real trick of it. It doesn't attack like a predator. It coaxes. It whispers. It makes stillness feel like a gift, like sleep, and sleep starts to seem like warmth. That's when you know you're in danger. There's a story that's stuck in your head. Not one from the usual frontier legends, but a lesser-known one. A French-Canadian voyageur named Henri Bastien, who got caught in a blizzard while alone, carrying 60 pounds of pelts. He realised he couldn't outrun it, so he dropped his pack, hollowed out a drift near a stand of fur, and buried himself in his own robes. Before the snow sealed him in, he took off one boot, not both, just one, and buried it in the snow beside his head. People thought he'd gone mad when they found him 3 days later, but he hadn't. That boot had frozen solid and saved his life. He'd used it as a time anchor. Every few hours, when the need to sleep got too strong, he'd feel for the boot. If he could still feel its shape with his fingers, still dig it out, then he wasn't numb, wasn't dead. He kept himself alive with one cold foot and a stubborn refusal to stop checking. You get it now. These little hacks. These weird, desperate tricks. They weren't just survival methods, they were mental anchors. When visibility goes, so does logic. So you create rituals. Touch the same spot every hour. Sing the same line of an old song. Chew snow slowly to stay hydrated without freezing your teeth. Anything to keep a sliver of self intact while the rest of the world disappears. You pull your scarf down and breathe warm air into your gloves, cycling your hands one at a time. It doesn't feel good, but it doesn't feel nothing. And that's the goal. Mountain men didn't wait to feel warm. They waited to not go numb. Comfort wasn't even on the menu, just maintenance. You stay cold enough to stay cautious, warm enough to stay functioning, right on the razor's edge. The white still rages above, but it's starting to shift. You hear it before you see it. A thinning of the noise. Less roar, more hiss. The snow's not falling quite as hard. The sky goes from blank slate to ghost grey. A dimness lifts, almost imperceptible, but you've been watching long enough to notice. This is the moment they waited for, the crack in the storm, the breath before the next punch. Time to move, not far, just enough. You push up from your snow pit slowly, not wanting to draw in a pocket of cold too fast. The landscape above is still all wrong, flat, white, depthless. But now you can see shadows where trees lean against the wind. That's enough to aim for. You crawl first, not walk, keeping low to avoid gusts. Your body's stiff, uncooperative, but still yours. You whisper thanks under your breath, not sure to who, or why. There's another trick the mountain men used, circling trees. In blizzards, they'd walk around a single tree over and over, pushing snow outward with each lap, creating a kind of snowy crater. It kept them moving, let them build up heat, gave their brains something repetitive to chew on while they waited. They'd pause only to catch breath or stomp their feet back to life, not a shelter, not quite. But a middle ground between freezing and surviving. You find a stand of spruce and repeat the ritual. Walk, circle, stomp, 1 lap, 2, 10. You don't know how long you keep at it, but when the clouds finally rip open and spill a beam of pale afternoon sun, you're still upright, still circling, still here. The snow glitters like powdered glass now. The storm is done, for now. You stand in your circle, sweating and cold at the same time, and feel a dizzy kind of pride. Not because you beat it. You didn't. But because you endured, like they did. Historians still argue how many whiteouts the mountain men survived. But maybe the better question is, how many survived them by simply refusing to disappear? No maps, no trail markers. Just grit, instinct, and the quiet wisdom to know when not to fight the cold but to ride it. To shape yourself against it, to outlast it. You wipe your nose, feel your face thaw slightly and start walking toward the ridge. Your steps are slow, heavy, but steady. The cold's still there, waiting to claim something. But it won't be you. Not today. You're not even sure when your feet went numb. Somewhere between the third snowdrift and that half-frozen creek crossing, they stopped offering opinions about temperature. Now they just exist. Slabs of meat wrapped in hide, mechanical and obedient. You stomp them periodically, trying to stir up circulation, but the cold has settled into them like an overdue rent notice. And this, right here, is when the mountain men would start talking about their feet like they were separate people. Stubborn, slow, unwilling to cooperate. Because in the cold, your feet aren't just passengers, they're liabilities. The wilderness chews up feet in winter, not dramatically, not instantly, but relentlessly. And the mountain men, they understood this better than anyone. They wrapped, dried, unwrapped, rewrapped, insulated, monitored, and, when it came to it, sacrificed feet to save the rest of the body. That's the quiet horror of cold exposure. It doesn't demand an arm or your life all at once. It starts by taking a toe, or 3. You pause now under a thick tangle of trees and drop to a squat, fumbling to loosen your laces. Every move is stiff. The leather is stiff. Your fingers are stiff. Everything feels like it's been dipped in wax. When you finally get your boots off, you pull your socks away slowly, expecting to see something grim. What you get isn't frostbite, not yet. But your toes are pale, your nails are dull grey. You wiggle them. A few respond, a few kind of think about it. You need to dry them. Fast. The mountain men didn't have waterproof boots, not the kind we do. They had moccasins, layers of hide, maybe 2 pairs stacked, maybe lined with fur. They'd keep your feet quiet in the woods, sure, but not dry, not warm. So they doubled up, tripled up. They stuffed moss, grass, rabbit fur inside the toe boxes to hold warmth. They dried their moccasins every night, even if it meant sleeping with them inside their robes to keep them from freezing into stiff husks. If your boots froze overnight, you weren't walking anywhere in the morning. And if you tried, well, you'd be ripping hide, or feet. You set your socks by the fire, which you've coaxed back to life with a few damp twigs and desperation. You rotate your feet near the heat, carefully, not too close. Mountain men knew better than to roast cold feet. That's how you lose them. Rewarming frozen flesh too quickly damages tissue. You go slow, wait for pins and needles, wait for colour. This is how they lived, constantly negotiating with their own limbs. There's a recurring line in many of their journals. The feet suffer. Just that. Matter of fact. Not poetic. Just the truth. They always knew what part of the body would give out first, and so they invented hacks. One of the weirder fringe methods involves stuffing their moccasins with dried animal dung. Buffalo mostly. Not for scent, obviously. But for insulation, dried dung holds air, air holds warmth. And when it's all you have between your feet and the frozen world, you stop worrying about how it smells. Others swore by ashes, rubbing a small amount of cold wood ash onto their feet before putting on dry socks. The idea being that the powder would absorb any lingering moisture and act as a primitive foot powder. Was it effective? Debatable. But when you're out here for months, you try everything. Some old mountain men swore by rotating footgear every day. 1 pair of moccasins on the feet, 1 drying by the fire, 1 stashed for emergencies. That's assuming you were rich in footwear, which most weren't. So they dried what they had, patched holes with sinew, sewed scrap fur into soles. Every day was a balancing act between movement and moisture. Wet feet were worse than cold feet. Cold feet you could warm, wet feet made you rot. That's not poetic either. That's trench foot, or what they used to call foot rot. Spend enough days in damp hides, sweating into your socks and never airing out your boots, and your skin turns soft, grey, and eventually peels off like old wallpaper. The cold doesn't even need to reach freezing to do this. Just enough dampness, just enough neglect. There's an account in one fur brigade record of a man who walked 2 days on raw feet, literally peeled open, wrapped in strips of his own shirt, no boots, no socks, just linen and pain. He survived somehow. Said later he didn't remember much, except that every step felt like stepping on hot nails. Afterward he only had 4 toes. He named one of them Lucky. You stare at your own feet now, feeling the life crawl back into them like a slow tide. The colour's improving. The skin isn't split. Yet. You grab your driest socks and rub a little grease onto your toes. Not much, just enough to create a barrier. and slide them back on. You set your boots upside down near the fire to bake gently. This too is part of the rhythm, the foot routine, every night. No matter how tired, no matter how cold. Remove boots, dry socks. Massage feet, rewrap, sleep, wake, repeat. It's tedious. But so was surviving. And it wasn't just individual wisdom. The mountain men shared foot tips like they were gold. You find them in letters, passed from one camp to another. Stuff beaver fur in the toe if you run low on socks. Cut strips of rabbit hide into sandals if the soles wear thin. Don't trust new boots in deep snow. One man claimed to have lined his entire boot with moss and walked 3 weeks without a blister. Another said he dipped his feet in cold water each morning to toughen them up. That one probably didn't work. But again, they tried everything. You finally lace your boots back on, feeling a little more human, a little less frostbitten. The sun's angled low now, a yellow smear behind the clouds. You've got just enough light to find a safer place to sleep tonight. But your feet? They've bought you a few more hours of walking, and out here, that's as good as a guarantee. You stand slowly, feeling the stiffness in your knees, the familiar burn returning to your thighs. Everything hurts, everything moves, but your feet are talking to you again, and for now, they're still saying yes. The cold can have your warmth, but it can't have your footing. Not yet. You've reached the part of the cold where nothing feels real anymore. The sky has gone dull and colourless, like an old bruise. Your thoughts are out of sync with your steps, moving in slow loops, sometimes repeating themselves, sometimes skipping ahead. You catch yourself asking questions out loud that no one's around to answer. Did I pass that tree already? Why is the snow so loud? Am I still heading west? It's not panic, not yet. It's mental drift, and every trapper who's ever trudged through the long cold knew exactly what it meant. The body's still going, but the mind is slipping. There's a reason the mountain men feared this state more than wolves, more than starvation, more even than frostbite. Because once the cold gets into your thoughts, you're just a few quiet choices away from disappearing, forgetting to put gloves back on after eating, leaving your fire untended because you think you'll just rest for a minute, wandering away from your shelter to chase a phantom sound. It's not drama, it's not weakness, it's neurological hypothermia, but they didn't call it that. They just said, he went snow mad. You feel it pressing on you now, not strong, not loud, just a gentle suggestion. Wouldn't it be easier to lie down for a while? Maybe under that pine tree, just until your head clears. You shake it off. Out loud, actually, just to reassert control. Your voice sounds strange in your own ears, like someone else is using your mouth. That's when you remember the trick, and it pops into your head like a scrap of forgotten advice. Sing. So you do, softly at first. Some stupid camp song from your childhood, butchered and half-remembered, then louder. Not because it's good, but because sound is a proof you're still here. That's what the old trappers understood. They talked to themselves, hummed, recited poems or verses or old insults to imaginary companions, anything to build a rhythm, a thread of thought that would tether them to reality while their bodies did the trudging. You imagine one of them now, pushing through a blizzard with a battered hat and a frost-clumped beard, muttering the Lord's Prayer or cursing a mule from a decade ago. Not because they were losing it, but because they were staying sane. Out here, clarity isn't automatic, it's a practice. That's why, when they camped together, trappers often slept in shifts, not just to tend the fire, but to keep each other company in the darkest hours, when the cold pressed hardest against the brain. They told stories, asked questions, goaded each other into arguments over nothing, just to keep their minds sharp. One journal describes a pair of men who passed a night-long blizzard, debating whether a squirrel could outsmart a dog. The answer didn't matter. The conversation did. You pick up the pace now, not because you want to, but because you need to. Movement is your anchor. The faster you go, the warmer you stay, and the more your brain gets dragged along for the ride, it's tempting to stop again, to crouch under a rock ledge or burrow into a drift. But you remember what they always warned: rest only when ready, not when tempted. That's the line between strategy and surrender. Eventually you spot something up ahead, a strange rise in the snow, a sort of lump near the base of a hill. You approach cautiously, thinking it might be an old camp. What you find is a collapsed lean-to, half eaten by wind and time. The roof has caved in, the pine walls are grey with rot, but the bones are there. The shape. A human hand built this once. Someone huddled here in a storm like the one you just crossed through. Maybe they survived. Maybe they didn't. You brush snow off the inside and sit just for a moment, just long enough to feel that echo. The mountain men left behind more than journals. They left behind ghost shelters, places like this, half forgotten, scattered across the wilderness like breadcrumbs. If you know what to look for, you'll see them. A ring of rocks blackened by fire, a notch carved into a fallen tree, scraps of leather nailed into the side of a trunk still clinging after a century of wind. None of it's useful now, but all of it matters, because these were the cold season marks of the men who understood what we've mostly forgotten, that survival is repetition. You don't outwit the cold, you outlast it. One fire at a time, 1 mile, one dry pair of socks, one verse of a song you barely remember. They didn't beat winter, they bargained with it, wore it down, built 1,000 of these half shelters, each one a message. I was here. I stayed warm. I kept walking. There's a legend you remember, probably untrue but still useful, about a trapper who survived a brutal Montana winter by keeping a string of talking logs. Each night he'd carve a word into a stick and toss it into the fire. Today, alive. Still here, westward. When the snow thawed, searchers found his camp. The ashes of all those sticks curled in the hearth like tiny scrolls. They thought he'd gone mad. But you don't. Not now. The air is cooling again, sun dropping behind the trees. You start to pack up, tugging your scarf over your mouth, double-checking your gear. You reach into your pocket, grab a stick from the floor of the old lean-to and scratch a word into it with your knife. Clear. You toss it into the coals of your little fire and watch it catch. Not magic, not meaning, just momentum. You walk out of the shelter, head into the wind, and start humming again. Something slow, familiar, annoyingly catchy. It's not a plan, but it's a step. And tonight, when the cold comes again, as it always does, you'll meet it not with bravado, not with defiance, but with discipline. With one more fire, one more verse, one more mile in the right direction. Because the real enemy isn't the cold, it's forgetting while you're still moving. The last light of day is draining out of the sky as you reach the ridge. It's not dramatic. There's no blazing sunset or golden hour glow. Just a slow dimming, like the wilderness is quietly pulling the curtain closed. Shadows stretch long across the snow, and every sound, your breath, your boots, the wind, is muted. You've been walking all day. Your legs ache in a dull, dependable way. Your shoulders are sore from the constant pull of your gear, and your thoughts have stopped wandering. They're focused now, heavy. Because this ridge, it feels final, like the end of something. You look out across the valley below, trying to make out landmarks in the gathering dusk. There are a few tree clusters, a frozen creek winding like a scar, and there, barely visible in the half-light, a dark, low structure near a boulder. Not a trapper's hut exactly, but maybe a winter hunting shack. Maybe older, maybe abandoned. But it has shape angles, a roof, and that's more than you've had in days. You start down the slope, careful with your footing. The snow here is crusted from sun and wind, crunching beneath your boots. Your balance is off from fatigue, but you push through. Because the mountain men had a phrase for this time of day, the edge. They called it that not because it was poetic, but because it was. The edge of light, the edge of warmth, the edge of judgment. They knew more mistakes were made in the final hour before dark than in the entire day that came before. One journal described it like this: "The cold does not speak louder at dusk, but you hear it more clearly. That rings in your ears now as the shack draws closer. The doorway is half buried in drifted snow. The wood is weather-worn, grey and splintered, but the structure is solid. You don't hesitate. You dig, hands aching, until the door gives, with a low groan, and swings inward. Inside it's dark but not empty. There's an old stone hearth, a few wooden crates stacked against the wall, a broken chair and a pile of pine boughs that look just fresh enough to be recent. Someone's been here. Maybe last week, maybe last year. Either way, it's shelter. You step in, pull the door shut behind you, and for the first time in days there's stillness. No wind, no snow in your eyes. Just you, and the cold breathing against the outside walls. You move quickly now. The rhythm kicks in without you even thinking. Pine boughs for bedding, gear stashed in the corner, fire prep begun. Your fingers move automatically, scraping kindling, striking sparks, because this part has become ritual. And that's the final thing the mountain men knew that we've mostly forgotten. You don't wait until you're safe to build your routine. The routine makes you safe. There's a comfort in this repetition. A comfort that doesn't rely on heat or shelter or full stomachs, but on the predictability of your own actions. Trappers lived by this. Wake, pack, walk, eat, dry, sleep, repeat. Not because they were stubborn or simple, but because the structure of routine was armour a framework that made cold just another variable to be managed, not an existential threat. You feel that now as the fire finally catches and blooms in the hearth. You didn't survive today because you got lucky. You survived because you stayed inside the pattern, and in the glow of the fire as warmth begins to chase the edge off your hands and face, you notice something. Scratched into one of the beams above the hearth, almost invisible in the flickering light, is a name. Just initials, really, and a date. 1839. You trace it with your fingers, imagining the man who left it. How long did he stay here? What did he eat? Did he make it back to the rendezvous? Did he sing to himself as the wind screamed against the walls? Maybe. Probably. Yeah. Because if he carved his name, it meant he made it through at least one night. And that's the whole game, isn't it? You heat a little water, enough to soften your last scrap of dried meat. It's not a meal, but it's something warm. You eat slowly, eyes half closed, letting the fire crackle beside you. The shack creaks with the weight of wind on its roof, but it holds. The heat stays. Your boots are off, your socks drying, and your fingers are still yours. That's enough. In a few minutes, you'll lie back on the pine boughs, wrapped in hide and smoke, and let your body begin the slow, quiet reset it needs. You won't sleep deeply. No one really does out here. But you'll rest. You'll dream, maybe. Or just drift. Let the embers keep watch. The mountain men had no illusions about triumph. There was no beating the cold. No final victory. Just the slow, stubborn process of meeting it, again and again, and refusing to stop. You feel that now, curled in this shack on the far side of nowhere, carrying stories not in books or maps or fireside songs, but in your bones, in your steps, in the rhythm you've rebuilt by force. You're not just surviving the cold, you're remembering the truth about it, the truth they carried and we let go. That comfort is fragile, that warmth is a verb, and that resilience is less about strength than repetition. You do the thing, and then you do it again. Tomorrow the cold will still be there, so will the snow, so will the ridge, but so will you. Still walking, still warm enough, still here.
You've made it. Not to a finish line, exactly, but to a moment that feels like one. The fire's dying down in the hearth, its glow pulsing low and sleepy across the rough wooden walls of the shack. You're stretched out on a bed of pine boughs, the hide cloak pulled around you like a second skin, listening to the wind dance across the roof. Not in a hurry, not angry anymore. Just there, moving like it always has, like it always will. And for the first time in a long stretch of cold, your body isn't fighting to keep up, it's just being. There's something powerful about that. In a world obsessed with defeating nature, conquering, taming, bending it into shape, the mountain men chose something else. They learned how to be inside it. They learned how to get along with it. The cold wasn't an enemy. It wasn't a force to be overthrown. It was just a fact, like gravity, like the dark. You didn't beat it, you endured it, you respected it, and in that relationship, gritty, patient, exhausting, was a kind of peace. Now, with the fire down to coals and your breath fogging soft in the flicker, that peace is here too. Not perfect, not pretty, but enough. You pull your blanket tighter, shift your legs beneath the furs, and stare at the faint glow on the ceiling, the echo of flame. And you think about the ones who came before you, the men who walked this cold before there were roads, who didn't have GPS or Gore-Tex or weather forecasts or rescue helicopters. Just instincts, repetition. Knowledge passed from hand to hand, fire to fire, boot print to boot print. And somehow they made it through. You did too. And tomorrow, you'll rise. Pack. Walk. Watch the sky. Feel the snow. Keep the rhythm. Because now, you know, not just the cold, but how to live with it, how to wear it, how to carry it without letting it sink into your bones. That's the inheritance, that's the story. And tonight, with your heart beating slow, your hands warm enough, and the wind slipping like silk across the eaves, you let it go quiet. The cold's still out there, but tonight it's not coming in.